I'm not used to seeing my name up on the screen, so it confused me. Anyway, good evening, folks. Erev Tov. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got a few administrational things I need to share with you. Number one, as I just did, please put your cell phone on silent. Okay, that would help us very much. And also, before we officially begin, please be reminded that in case of a siren, you stay right here. You don't move anywhere. You stay right here if there's a siren. In addition, please use headphones for simultaneous translations when required, as sessions today will be held both in English and in Hebrew. And Stevie has requested me to remind you that there's a QR code to see the schedule on your registration tag, okay? So you can discover what the QR is, as I just did, and enjoy seeing the agenda. And it is now my pleasure to open the 24th Shabtai Shavit World Summit on Counter-Terrorism as we fight on 7 different fronts. Dearest Yoel, children, grandchildren of the next generation of warriors, we miss dear Shabtai dearly, and he is here with us in spirit. Yehi Zichro Baruch. This impressive gathering is a flagship of the International Institute for Counterterrorism of the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy, and Strategy at Reichman University. The theme of this year's summit is from September 11th to October 7th, Navigating New Threats. During the next 2 days, hundreds of participants from around the world. By the way, I'm standing up here, and this conference hall is packed. This conference hall is almost filled to the brim. So someone did a great job here, in spite of the fact that we're in the middle of a war. And these distinguished individuals who came to the conference are ministers, members of parliament, Congress, Knesset, ambassadors, heads of security services, representatives in the academic field in this day and age. All of you will have the opportunity to discuss the ways and means of countering terrorism and to help make the world a safer place to live. This year's conference is held during a war, so we ask your understanding and patience of any potential changes that may occur. It is crucial to stay united, share our insights, be nice to each other, and move forward with purpose in these challenging times. We are more than proud of our speakers, some of whom flew here from overseas, people like Olaf, Udi, others who came here especially, and we're proud of everyone else from overseas who voted with us and came to Israel at a time where instead of taking Lufthansa, you got Israel Air instead. Okay? At all times, we remember our fallen warriors, injured soldiers, IDF combatants, and our hostages who must be released now. Please direct your attention to the yellow chair on the stage in order to remind us to constantly fight for the immediate release of our student Idan Shtivi together with the rest of the hostages. Release them now. Please allow me to thank Please allow me to thank the sponsors and partners without whom we could not have organized this conference. Firstly, the Chuzidman Foundation. I believe Yigal is here with us, and I imagine that Daniel is watching from someplace, either in New York or some other place. But if you're watching us, Daniel, warm regards from Professor Reichman, who's smiling in the first row, saying hi to you. And then, of course, Ambassador Ronald Lauder and the Gerald Schwartz and Heather Reisman Foundation. Daphne and Gerald Kramer, we love you dearly, Daphne, for everything you do. You're a Zionist trooper. Sir David Garrard and Ava Chung, they're watching us this instant from London. I'm looking at Boaz Ganor. He's giving you warm regards. I'm looking at Stevie. He's giving you warm regards. I'm looking at Natalie. She's giving you warm regards. We love you dearly. We thank you so much for what you've done during this year. Sir David and Ava, on behalf of this university, it's amazing. Stephen and Bonnie Stern, they're watching from New York. Boaz met them just 2 weeks ago. Warm regards to the Stern family. Evelyn Taman Dweck, our veteran supporter and special member of the ICT family, is with us here tonight. The Public Affairs Office of the Embassy of the United States in Israel, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, KAS, the municipality of Herzliya, including the mayor, is with us today. Infra for Better, Center for Advanced Studies on Terrorism, Rise Up Yoel, Go Yael, Vertex Pro, Counter-Terrorism Solutions, Sir Ehud Shelig. It is a pleasure to have you in the audience, and we are honored that you are part of our family. This world-class poppy exhibit outside this building on the Joey Low Lecture Hall is the donation of Udi, and it's beautiful, and it creates a tremendous amount of resilience. Take a good look at that exhibit. It was the idea of Professor Boaz Ganor to bring this here, and it brings out the best in us. Of course, we have Professor Uriel Reichman. He's the founding president of Reichman University. He's the chairperson of the board of directors. Everything you see on this campus has been made at IDC and later at Reichman University by Professor Reichman. The conference hall that you're sitting in right now, that's Professor Reichman. When you walk through the gates of this university, that's Professor Reichman. And a vast majority of the buildings here and everything else. And I have to say that the Reichman spirit is upon us. It influences everyone in the management, starting with the president, which brings me to welcome all of the vice presidents, deans, your excellencies, ambassadors, consuls, military attachés who are in the audience. My name's Jonathan Davis. I'm one of the vice presidents at Reichman University. I'm head of the Rafael Recanati International School, retired IDF lieutenant colonel, for wherever that's worth. Without any further ado, we'll be starting the memorial ceremony for Shabtai Shavit, of blessed memory, former Mossad director and founding chairman of the board of directors of the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, with a short video clip.
Shabtai Shavit was born in 1939 in Neshel, a suburb of Haifa in pre-state Israel. Shavit joined the IDF's elite Sayeret Matkal Special Forces unit shortly after its establishment, where he served with distinction. This experience laid the groundwork for his future in Israel's intelligence community. Shavit joined the Mossad in 1964, starting his career as a collection officer. He quickly rose through the ranks, serving in various operational roles and senior command positions, both in Israel and abroad. After serving for 4 years as the deputy director of the Mossad, Shavit was appointed as its 7th director in 1989. He was the last Mossad director whose name remained classified, maintaining the agency's secrecy. During his tenure as head of the Mossad, between 1989 and 1996, Shavit guided the Mossad through a period of significant global and regional changes. Shavit played a key role in the negotiations leading to the 1994 peace agreement between Israel and Jordan after years of covert ties. The day after the treaty was signed, King Hussein personally thanked Shavit for his crucial role in achieving peace. Under his leadership, the Mossad's credo and values were defined. Following his retirement from the Mossad in 1996, together with Professor Reichman, Professor Boaz Ganor, and a few others, Shavit co-founded the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, ICT, here at Reichman University, and served as its chairman of the board, continuing his dedication to Israel's security. For 27 years, he worked tirelessly to advance the Institute's mission, contributing his extensive knowledge and experience to help eradicate terrorism in Israel and the world. On September 5th, 2023, Shabtai Shavit passed away at the age of 84.
כולנו כאן, באוניברסיטה, לצד מאות אלפים רבים ברחבי המדינה, אבלים על לכתו של שבתאי. הוא ייזכר על עוז הרוח והמנהיגות, על מסירותו ללא סייג להגנת קיומנו כעם חופשי בארצנו.
אדם מיוחד, מפקד נדיר, וככל שהיטבתי להכיר אותו, כך גברה הערצתי אליו.
With Shavit's passing, the state of Israel lost a brave warrior who dedicated his life to the country and its security, and Reichman University lost a cherished friend and partner on our journey.
במשך מעל לרבע מאה, אני וכל אנשי המכון לדורותיהם זכינו בדמות מופת, במודל ובמנטור מהשורה הראשונה. עם הזמן שחלף, התפתחו בינינו יחסי אמון ואף חברות עמוקה. ידעתי תמיד שבעת הצורך שבתאי יהיה שם בשביל המכון ובשבילי. רוחו של שבתאי וערכיו יהיו נר לרגלינו עד עולם. תהא נשמתו של שבתאי צרורה בצרור החיים.
Yehi Zichro Baruch. Heather Reisman and Gerald Schwartz of Canada are the very good friends of Yoel and the late Shabtai Shavit. Due to their kindness and generosity, in the midst of this war, they agreed to name this conference for the late Shabtai Shavit. We are grateful and indebted to the Gerald Schwartz and Heather Reisman Foundation. Jerry Schwartz is a Jewish-Canadian business leader. He is the founder and CEO of Onyx Corporation, one of Canada's oldest and most successful private equity firms. Heather Reisman is the founder, chair, and CEO of Indigo Books and Music, Canada's largest book, gift, and specialty toy retailer. The couple's generous contribution is rooted in their deep commitment to the State of Israel.
Hello, my name is Heather Reisman, and it's my honor to be here on behalf of my husband, Gerald Schwartz, and myself to welcome you all to the first Shabtai Shavit World Summit on Counterterrorism. Unlike all of you in the audience, I am far removed from the world of counterterrorism, but I was very close to Shabtai, who was one of the most special people in our lives. In every way, Shabtai was a mentor, a friend, an advisor, and most of all, the person to whom Jerry and I turned whenever we had a deeply difficult problem and needed the best of advice. He was such a special person in our lives, loving, supportive, strong, deeply intelligent, and always that special kind of reserve that let you know that when you asked him a question, he was going to think about it and bring his very, very best advice. We miss Shabtai every single day, and we particularly missed him and miss him this year when the world is in such turmoil and the country that he devoted his life to and that we love so much, Israel, is under such extreme pressure. At some level, we're happy that he's not here to see what has happened over the last 12 months. But in every way, we know that Israelis, everyday Israelis and Israeli leadership are missing his guidance. I hope that this conference is a meaningful one and that in every way it reflects the values that Shabtai brought to everything he did. Thank you.
We thank Ms. Reisman and Mr. Schwartz for this message. And now, we welcome Michal Shavit. Dr. Michal Shavit has been known to us on this campus as an outstanding academic advisor at the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy at Reichman University. She also happens to be the daughter of the late Shabtai Shavit and continues his legacy by carrying the torch at this university. It's my honor to welcome her to share a few words with you.
Mayor Herzliya, Mr. Yariv Fisher, founder and chairman of the board, Professor Reichman, Boaz Ganor, president of Reichman University and founder of the ICT, dear guests. The conference this year of the ICT is especially meaningful. The idea to name the conference for my father, Shabtai Shavit, happened thanks to Ms. Heather Reisman and Mr. Gerald Schwartz, my mentors, Shabtai of blessed memory, and Yael, may she live long. And for that, I would like to thank them heartily. I'd like to thank Professor Reichman for his friendship and friendship of many years with my father, who laid the foundation for this institute. I would like to thank Professor Boaz Ganor, who commemorates my father and his heritage so well, and everyone who honors him just by participating in this conference. I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference, especially the ICT team, a dedicated team that have done so much in order to make this happen under terrible conditions. And last vote of thanks to all the participants who have convened here in the special hall in Reichman University in order to contribute to the discourse here in Israel at this time. The Institute for Counter-Terrorism in Reichman University were for my father a professional academic home since the institution was established almost 3 decades ago. The warm friendship and his appreciation for Professor Reichman laid the foundation for the famous story of how the ICT was founded by Professor Boaz Ganor and many other important people. Over the years, my father had taken part in many activities and seminars of the university, and he also taught personally under Stevie Weinberg. And all of that was just like intellectual oxygen for him. It gave him space to do. And the students were able, through him, to have direct interaction with a person who, by his very personality, is part of the values of the university. And it's been a year since my father passed away on September 5th, 2023. It was probably the worst year in the Israeli history, a year that has painted our family grief in deeper meaning and that is so complex. My father's roots in the Zionist home in which he grew up tied him to the Jewish people, to the state of Israel. His parents spoke Hebrew even before they came to Israel and were both teachers and educators who taught Hebrew in Hebrew. For most of his adult life, my father delved in intelligence, engaged in the safety and protection of Israel, and he felt when he was looking from the sidelines that in Israel, since its establishment, wonders have happened. The Yom Kippur War that he participated in made him, as an intelligence person, as one who was adamant to have the need for alert for intelligence, alert for safety and security, but also in terms of the view of Israel as being a Jewish and democratic state. On November 4th, 1995, Saturday night, when my father waited like many others in the trauma unit in Ichilov Hospital for what the director of the hospital will be saying as to the condition of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, he wrote the questions that had come up in his mind that talked about the eternal perspective of people, of humans and life. And he said that Judaism that says a person can die, a Jew should die, is not Judaism. He did not think that was the right way. And that night, my father made the decision to end his position, his tenure as head of the Mossad. He was devastated with Rabin's murder because he had such a special relationship with him. They were both convinced that peace is yet another aspect of Israeli security and the security of the Jewish people in their homeland. My father had this evasive quality of charisma, leadership, that made people loyal to him. At home and in our family, his presence is still felt, even though it's been a year since he passed away physically. He was very intelligent, he had judgment, he had decision-making, he was able to be creative, although he didn't call himself creative. He could always find a twist in the plot. When people talked about screenplay for a TV series, he participated in it as if he was there, and he always said that reality surpassed the imagination. He was a person who transformed your life, and many people were impacted by him. He was a true Zionist, and the Mossad operations to have the Ethiopian Jews come to Israel was something he was very passionate about. He promoted any initiative to continue having the Ethiopian Jews come to Israel, and he was very proud of every such success story. The high number of Ethiopian Jews who came to our house during the Shiva just showed how he was so attached to them. He also contributed to the youth at risk military academy in Mitzpeh Ramon, and he, together with other partners, donated and really changed the lives of these teens. And they also honored him in the funeral and in the Shiva. And about a month later, we were told, unfortunately, that many have fallen during the October 7th battles and during the war. My father was one of the greatest heroes of this country, a true Zionist, really intelligent, very sharp in his thinking, very brave and courageous, a family man, very much beloved. But mostly, he really loved the state of Israel. Many ask me and wonder, what would my father have said if he were alive today? And I have no doubt, we have no doubt, that he would be standing here on the stage, and on other stages too, and try his hardest to stop the deterioration into the abyss that Israel is headed toward. One of the people he had commanded, when he gave a eulogy, he ended by saying, talking about October 7th, with a broken voice, he said, maybe there is consolation in the fact that he was saved this heartbreak. Excuse me. On the eve of October 7th, I would like to pray for the return of the 101 hostages who remain in Gazan captivity, and for the return of Idan Shtivi, our student, and I would like to pray for the healing and recuperation of those who have been wounded, and I'd like to pray for the safety of IDF soldiers, and also to share in the endless grief of the bereaved families, there are so many of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shavit, for sharing these emotional words of wisdom about the late Shabtai. And like I said before, it's very gratifying to see there's someone who's taking the torch from Shabtai and working at this university, and I understand that the grandchildren are serious folks who are doing important things for Israel, and that's gratifying. And now, I would like to introduce you to a wonderful singer. Her name is Lee Ganor. I've known her since she was a youngster. So I've known her for many, many years. And she's a wonderful singer and performer. And basically, due to popular demand, she's the most veteran singer of all times at ICT conferences. Without any further ado, you're going to hear Ani Gitara. In English, it means, I'm a guitar. I'm a guitar. Okay? Lee, where are you?
הרוח מנגן עליי בחילופי עונות. אני גיטרה, מישהו פורט עליי בחילופי המנגינות. כשמתחשק לי לפלרטט, אני פוצח בדואט, גם אם זה טריו או קוורטט, זה לא מפריע. על משבצות אדום לבן, אשכול בשלל השולחן, ואגסים דמויי סזן וגם סנגריה. אני גיטרה, הרוח מנגן עליי בחילופי עונות. אני גיטרה, מישהו פורט עליי בחילופי המנגינות. אני סימן, אני עדות לידידות ולבדידות, וגם במשעולי ילדות אצעד לבטח. הרפתקאות צועניות במטוסים, באוניות, וטעויות צבעוניות על כל השטח. אני גיטרה, הרוח מנגן עליי בחילופי עונות. אני גיטרה, מישהו פורט עליי בחילופי המנגינות. מה שנוגע לבנות, יש הסכמים, יש הבנות, ואין לי טענות, גם לא היו לי. לא התייאשתי מימיי, כי מה שלא קרה במאי יקרה בעזרת השם ודאי ביוני יולי. אני גיטרה, הייתי פעם עץ אולי, ובתיבת התעודה אני זוכרת כל מי שניגן עליי, ואני אומר תודה.
Just a note, and that is that this song, Ani Gitara, was chosen by the family for Lee to sing here tonight because it was one of Shabtai's favorite songs. So the spirit of Shabtai is also here through the beautiful rendition of Lee Ganor, an amazing singer and performer. And Yiftach Dor is the guitarist. So Yiftach Dor is the guitar of the song Ani Gitar. Okay, it is now my pleasure to introduce you to our very special academic counter-terrorist who has made this conference possible together with a most dedicated and caring team of individuals. His name is Professor Ganor. He comes right after his daughter, and that's great. We have some Ganor DNA here. He is starting his second year as president of Reichman University, and he's the founder and chairman of the board of the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism and the Ronald Lauder Chair of Counter-Terrorism at Reichman University. We know him as a leader, lecturer, professor, and then president of Reichman University, who promotes the Reichman spirit. He promotes the spirit of Professor Uriel Reichman on a daily basis, and especially during this war, when we were challenged greatly at this university and country.
Professor Reichman, the chair of the executive of the Reichman University, and I'd like to say that tomorrow we're going to hear Uri speaking, Yariv Fisher, the mayor of Herzliya, Professor Gilead. I called him professor, rightly so, because he just became one. Yael Shavit, the Shavit family, distinguished guests. We're opening today the 24th International Summit Counter-Terrorism in the Reichman University, which is completely different than the 23 conferences that preceded it. Apart from the fact that this conference is happening during a war, all the others took place on September 11, because we wanted to commemorate the day where the most terrible terror attack took place. But this year, we decided to hold the conference on October 7, because on this heinous day, the Hamas and the Jihad invaded Israel and caused a number of casualties that proportionally to the size of the population is much, much bigger than 9/11. The second change is that this year, for the first time, we decided to change the name of the international conference to the World Summit on Counter-Terrorism, named after Shabtai Shavit of blessed memory. Unfortunately, last year, we lost the chairman and the founder of the ICT. He had the golden share in establishing the institute and also manager of the conference. And that's the reason why we're opening this conference in an event to commemorate him. And together in the hall, there are many of his friends, his colleagues, and lovers of Shabtai, including, of course, his widow, Yair, his children, grandchildren, and other family members. I'm sure that in this hall there are many people who can tell about a lot of things covered and known activities of Shabtai. He dedicated his life for the State of Israel, and I won't try to summarize. I'm just happy that Shabtai managed to launch his book before his passing, which tells of his fascinating biography as well as the main points in the history of the State of Israel and the other events that Shabtai took place in. He either commanded them or was part of. And if you didn't read his book yet, then I recommend wholeheartedly to do so. I knew Shabtai when he resigned from the Mossad in 1966. I presented him with the idea to have an academic institute for the research of terror. I was a doctorate in the university. I was in the intelligence, in the army, and a consultant of the prime minister. Wasn't supposed to interest somebody who just finished such an important role as head of Mossad. But Shabtai was open and attentive. He liked the idea of opening an institution, and together with additional people who resigned, some of them are here in this hall, he was mobilized. The combination of this group, together with the Reichman, who established the interdisciplinary center, that brought about a real cooperation of 27 years and a very important and relationship of Shabtai as the director and I as a partner. You can just imagine how grateful I was to Shabtai. He saw in this a mission, but at that time also the respect I had for him. The bad news about his passing was really a shock to me. A week before the international conference of last year, just a while before, I told him that Professor Reichman chose me to be the rector of the university. He was happy for me, and I was so happy that I managed to share this news with him. I and all the people in ICT, we were privileged to know a real role model in Shabtai, and we shall continue in his spirit. With all the difficulty, and believe me, it is difficult, we are opening today the international conference that was planned and prepared for the first time without Shabtai's involvement, the 24th conference. It's difficult to imagine the different considerations that we had to cope with the question, do we hold a conference altogether this year? How such uncertainty and so many security events that happened. One day we decided to hold the conference, and then because of the missiles that came to Israel, then people started canceling. Guests and also security people, they told us not to hold it. The next day it seems that everything was okay, and we continued, and we decided that this is a national debt. We have to continue to do something like as a routine, not to allow our enemies to dictate things to us. How much pressure and tension and uncertainty. But here we are this evening, and we are now launching, and I hope we'll be able to complete this conference as planned. Even this is not 100% right. And we made a few decisions. One was that this year we're going to divide the conference to two parts. The first day, which we're opening today, is the first part of the conference to focus on the situation of the Middle East vis-à-vis the war in the 7th of October disaster. And later we shall do the second part of the conference with the experts and specialists that came from all over the world and discuss everything as we did in the past. In the first part of the conference, today and tomorrow, we want to look into how we got to this day and what way can we learn from the events of last year. Of course, we cannot summarize because we're in the event, we're in the war just now, but we have a duty even during the war, to try to give answers to the operative and strategic questions and also to draw conclusions. Also, we're going to discuss the implications about the axis of evil, the connection between Iran and the others. We'll have a discourse of specialists about the use of hostages as a strategic weapon by the terror and the immediate need to bring about their release and finish the war in Gaza. Another thing is the criminals of Hamas on October 7 against women and children. The best known specialists are going to speak to us, and we shall hear from security people from Israel and the world, or the president of the federal office in Germany of protection of the Constitution, the special emissary of the United States for the MISIC, the MIAs, the coordinator of the UN in the Middle East, the consultant of the FBI for national threats, and others. And this is, hopefully nobody is going to cancel their participation. And I'd like to thank you, dear audience, for coming here and honoring us with your presence. And I'm sure that when we end the first part of this conference tomorrow, we will understand better both the background and the situation and the challenges Israel is facing in most of the most difficult periods since its establishment. To conclude, although we're just opening the conference already now, I want to thank many people due to whom we managed to hold this conference. First of all, David Barniv, and our manager, the manager of all of us, Stevie Weinberg.
Thank you, Professor Ganor, for your leadership and for carrying the torch. It is now my pleasure to invite our graduate and the mayor of the city of Herzliya, His Excellency Yariv Fisher, to deliver his remarks.
Good evening. When you talk about the spirit of Reichman, I think about how in 2000 we came here as young students. And we were a bit maybe chutzpahdik, we were a bit blatant. We wanted to set up a political party here in Israel, and we also wanted to raise some funds. And then we went to Yossi, and I have to say, anyone who, as a major, anyone who is of a higher rank, you have to sort of bow down to before you even speak to. These are people who we really respect. So we came into Shabtai's room and we told him we wanted to change this country. And this man, the head of the Mossad, it took him about 20 seconds to just embrace us, take us, bring us in, and give us everything we wanted in order to change the country. And maybe we didn't manage to do that in the first elections, but we were very serious about what we wanted to do. Another meeting I had before I went into my office, into this position, was with you, Boaz. Boaz sent me the report, the ICT report, about all the different scenarios and the impact on the Israeli home front. And this barrage, the second Iranian barrage, the one on October 2nd, we prepared for from my first day in office. Strategically, we realized that we, the municipalities, are going to be alone on the front, and that the state of Israel is not able to defend the home front in a combined attack. So we immediately bolstered our defense array, and also our rapid response units. We also have 13 security motorbikes active in Herzliya. I listened to Boaz, and I hope that this day will never come, but we also have generators available. And it's not going to just be okay. That's what you taught me, Boaz, to never rely on it being okay. And then we also had an exercise happen on October 1st. Together with the Home Front Command. And so we were very, very prepared for this second Iranian barrage. And out of 200 missiles launched toward Israel, most of which were targeted toward the central Israel, only 12 fragments of missiles fell. But one missile fell very close to this spot, just meters away from where the gas canisters of the building were. It did not blow up, but it did require evicting the entire street, hundreds of people for many hours until work ended then. I can say on behalf of myself and other mayors, whether they're right-wing or left-wing politically, that neither in this incident nor in any other this past year, not a single person from the Israeli government called us up to ask whether we're okay, whether they can help, or just to come by for coffee. Distinguished audience, tomorrow the State of Israel will mark 1 year to October 7th, to the worst security incident Israel has ever known. We've been at war for a year and it's still a long way from ending. We are under terrible threats from many places, domestic and also external. And Churchill said that never have so many been indebted to so few. And the State of Israel said that due to the ongoing war and the many tasks that the IDF must carry out, because it is fighting on several fronts, including many fallen soldiers and many who have been impacted by the war, the IDF requires more human resources. And this report is also combined by the Prime Minister promoting an exemption for ultra-Orthodox. And this has nothing to do with our reality in this day and age. How can we ignore the war? How can we ignore Israeli security needs? We need the Israeli society to be together, not to be torn. I was in reserve duty for over 70 days, and I did so lovingly. This entire time, we felt that we were one people. We were united. We were determined. Left-wing, right-wing, religious, non-religious, Jews, Druze, Muslims. We all fought together for one purpose. But outside, we saw that the old politics continues to polarize us. I see my friends continue to shoulder the burden of the war, again to have to leave their homes, their children, the workplace, and to go to war. And while right now my military unit is deep inside Gaza, I can tell you that the only reason that my wife is happy I'm mayor is because I'm not out there in reserve duty, I'm not in Gaza. So the Israeli man who risks his life for 3 years in the army continues to do it when they're older as well, in reserve duty. They also risk their homes, they risk their careers, their children's life, and their family life. So in the business world, I have worked with Arab states for over 20 years. I am in touch with my friends who are sheikhs, who are in senior positions in the Arab world, who are good friends of mine. I also meet with over 70 ambassadors who live here in the city, and it's hard for me to explain what's happening here in Israel. Over the last 6 months, the phone has not stopped ringing. And I'm not even talking about just likes when you post something on social media. It's just complete silence. But when Nasrallah was killed, something happened. All of a sudden, there were phone calls. All of a sudden, the entire Sunni world, all the ambassadors were with us and supported us. But that brought about questions. What's the next phase? Where are you headed? What's your next step? What's your end game? And we have no answers to provide. We were naive and we thought the government would pursue the goals of the war, they would protect and they would support the IDF soldiers, the evicted families, they would heal the gap in society, but it's not happening. Everything is the responsibility of the civilians and we're doing everything in our power to help, but the government in these days too are trying to replace the municipalities, they are trying to pass the Arnona law or the rabbinic or the rabbi's law or the metro law. All of you will be paying more municipal tax, more arnona to fund the metro, but it's not going to happen for years to come, and we're going to have more changes to more laws. All of these changes are actually detrimental to our national resilience, and our credit rating is going down, and the implications for the Israeli economy is devastating. And for us as the municipality, talking about the budget for 2025, we have no certainty. So we, the municipalities, must actually take the reins in our own hands. During Swords of Iron, we saw how the municipalities are the ones who are taking care, who are the ones who are determined, who are professional, who handle all the difficulties and challenges. We at Herzliya municipality are taking responsibility for the lives of our citizens and residents, and we are taking many steps in order to make sure that people can continue with their routine during wartime. But we will not be able to do that if our income will be impacted because of government steps that will be taken. I would like to pray for the return of the hostages. On the eve of Rosh Hashanah, we were at the Shem Tov family and we saw how strong they were, but we also understood the importance of each and every one of you. You should all come, you should all impact. If you live in Herzliya, come to the dancing square every Thursday. It's very important. Dear distinguished audience, the state of Israel is at a crucial crossroads, and we are educating our children to fight for what we believe in, for this country, for making it a free and liberal country. And I'd like to say, please continue to do what you do. Please continue to believe that the time will come, that my mentor, my visionary, Professor Reichman, his vision will come true. Thank you very much.
Reichman University is very proud of its graduates, and Professor Reichman's dream and Professor Reichman's yearning is just like His Excellency the Mayor. We have dozens upon dozens of graduates coming out of Professor Reichman's impact, who are serving as generals in the IDF, brigadier generals in the IDF, colonels, members of the Knesset, mayors, members of the foreign ministry, hundreds upon hundreds of graduates from this university who are basically imbued by the Reichman spirit, which can perhaps change this country in a way where we can all feel very comfortable. And now, it is my honor to present a recorded message from the Honorable Isaac Herzog, the 11th President of the State of Israel, serving since July 7th, 2021. President Isaac Herzog is a public official who has been working in the service of the State of Israel and its society for over 20 years. He served as the government secretary, a member of the Knesset, and ministers in several governments. He was later elected the chairman of the Israeli Labor Party and served as a leader of the opposition in the Knesset. For 3 years, Herzog served as the chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency for Israel. In July 2021, he was elected president by an unprecedented majority in the Knesset, and he entered his office as the 11th president of the State of Israel.
Professor Boaz Ganor, president of Reichman University, distinguished participants and guests. This Shabtai Shavit World Summit on Counter-Terrorism is taking place at a fateful moment for Israel and the civilized world. As we mark 1 year to the worst terror attack in Israel's history, we remain in the depth of a battle to return thousands of our citizens, chased away by terror, to their homes on our northern border. The fears of escalation and broader war remain. I repeat the simple truth. We did not want this war. We have never wanted war. And we cannot allow, however, violent terrorism to displace nearly 100,000 Israelis of their homes, paralyze whole communities, and undermine the stability of an entire region. The state of Lebanon has been hijacked by a terror organization which has been armed to the teeth by an extremist Iranian regime and is threatening citizens on both sides, as terror always does. It took advantage of the horrific Hamas attack of October 7th to begin endlessly bombarding our civilians, and was actively planning to repeat that atrocity in the north before we struck preemptively to eliminate the immediate threat. This is not a new plan or a new strategy by Hezbollah. This is the contribution of a hateful vision to eradicate Israel, and it ties directly into the extremist jihadist ideology of the Iranian regime, whose aspirations extend much further and threaten the entire free world with its proxies all over the region, and terror cells all over the world. We must be clear. There can be no vacuum. Where moderate countries fail to lead, extremism and terror quickly fill the void. It is therefore absolutely critical that we strengthen our regional and global alliances to confront terror and extremism. Israel, the United States, Europe, our Middle East partners, and other like-minded countries around the world must come together to establish a new comprehensive Middle East security architecture. I believe that a comprehensive alliance to include maritime, cyber, space, satellites, intelligence sharing, R&D collaboration, AI, and what's not, would significantly decrease the chances of high-intensity regional war and ensure decisive victory if fighting becomes necessary. I believe that this is the only true choice if we wish to pave the path to a future of regional stability and peace. Moments of crisis can serve as a wake-up call to fundamentally change the equation, boldly confronting the obstacles to stability and peace, whilst creating the conditions for them to prosper. This was at the heart of the life work of Shabtai Shavit, at a critical intersection of Israel's strategy and tactical operation. Shavit was a leader in thinking boldly and creatively, driving policies of vigilance in the face of terror, but also recognizing opportunities for peace and acting decisively to anchor them. Dear friends, I believe that this is a pivotal moment for the civilized world, one that history will look back upon, and I hope and believe that we will meet this moment with the same determination and courage that has helped us build and rebuild as a nation time and time again. I thank the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, and I thank Reichman University, which as always is at the pioneering front of what is most relevant and pressing for all of us. And I want to congratulate its president, Boaz Ganor, who was a stalwart advocate of studying and teaching the pains of terror, the reasons for terror, and how to combat terror. Thank you, dear friends, and may you have a successful conference.
Thank you, President Herzog, for this message, and warmest regards to Michal, the First Lady, and longtime friend of Reichman University. It is now an honor to call to the stage Professor Major General Reserves Amos Gilead, Executive Director of the Institute for Policy and Strategy, IPS, and the chairman of the Herzliya Conference Series here at Reichman University, who will be interviewing member of the Knesset, Yuli Yoel Edelstein, the chairperson of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. I can guarantee you, knowing these two individuals, that you're in for a treat.
Good evening. First of all, just a word about Shabtai of blessed memory. I've known him since I was an officer in the army. I don't want to repeat things that were said, but I sent to the entire private family and the intelligence family for losing this man. Good evening, member of Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, chairman of the security committee. I thought it was a mistake when they said professor, because the last panel you were just a major general in the army, but congratulations for the new title. Thank you. You know, in intelligence, you have to check everything to make sure everything is right, but now it's verified from two sources. We are in a very special day, October 6th, the terrible disaster that is really not as bad as tomorrow 7. How do you look at it from your very important role? You're in the government, in the security system. I don't think there's anybody who's going to dispute the fact that this was a catastrophe in October 7, and also perhaps the embarrassment of the first few days, the first period. But now, a year later, I even will dare say that due to the various security forces, maybe today we're in a better place. It's difficult to say it, but better than what we were at in this imaginary silence and with great pain. I remember all the discussions in intimate fora that you know, that people ask the question, just a second, we didn't mention the South, and people said, why waste time? Hamas, they're deterred, there's no point. And now, of course, the situation is very different. What's left from the Hamas is perhaps a quarter or a third. It doesn't mean they're not going to rehabilitate themselves. They're still the dominant power in Gaza. They have money. But the military force and the higher echelon is definitely in a different place. And what's happening today in the north, apparently, when you prepare yourself properly and you have accurate intelligence and you have various targets in a very high level, then of course it seems that within a week or two you can have achievements that will lead to a situation that the Hezbollah at the moment it's still dangerous, they're still launching, but it's not the most bigger threat as he was called a year ago. But the question will be, no question, we have military achievements and operative achievements, but the question is, how do we not allow these things to deteriorate? We killed such and such terrorists, good enough, but within a year or two we'll find ourselves again vis-a-vis Hezbollah or Hamas that are already rehabilitated. We can wonder which we have a real strategy, because actually the IDF and the Shabak and the Mossad, that's another thing that I remember always. Shabtai, by the way, he was so focused on the strategic activity, but what they relate to our Mossad and to Shabak, we have to have some sort of a target, some sort of a mission. We're talking about, there's one student who is a symbol of the hostages, the terrible, terrible conditions. What strategy do we have in order to bring them back, first of all, alive? Even the army spokesman, when he spoke about it yesterday, he had tears in his eyes. Is there any plan, any program? What's going to happen? And what about Iran? First of all, let's start with the hostages, which is the most painful and important subject. I'm not going to surprise you or anybody else if I say that unfortunately there's no possibility for an Entebbe type of heroic mission and to bring them all together. These are not the conditions, and therefore, at the end of the day, it will come to some sort of a deal that at the moment, as the American Secretary of State said, that at the moment Hamas is not cooperating. But at the end of the day, it's going to happen. It can happen for the other reasons, because of either eliminating Sinwar and then talking to somebody under him who will be perhaps less aggressive than he is, maybe from the because if Sinwar maybe will feel that things are closing up on him, maybe it will go. But I don't see another way except in a deal, and at the end of the day, we will have to pay high prices for this deal, but we will pay it. I definitely decided not to go into details and into, I think all the discussions that are open in the public are damaged. And if we talk about the deal, a deal has to happen, high prices, no other way, and it's obvious that there's no victory in the world if we have hostages left there. As for Gaza, obviously, we have a controversy here. We're talking about the day after, but the day after, a real discussion will be only when Hamas is not in effective control of Gaza, that somebody else is going to come and take over. And therefore, the achievements of the IDF in the last 2 or 3 months that I think are completely different than 6 months ago. What IDF did in the last few months, really incredible job. And maybe it creates conditions, maybe in certain areas, there's the general plan, what they call, maybe in various areas we will be able to have an alternative administration, maybe pressure the Hamas in order to talk about a deal, and same goes also to think what can happen on the day after. But again, we have to say candidly, ideally, it's not going to be. Ideal situation is not going to be for many years to come. We always have to remember that today is October 6th. Most terrorists or most of these creatures who committed those crimes of October 7, for them, it was their first encounter with an Israeli or maybe with a Jew. If you think about the ages of 18 or 19, people who were born, they are a product of the education system, of propaganda in the mosques and the atmosphere. They're not under a terrible occupation, and that's why they came to take revenge. Therefore, I'm saying it's going to be a very long process. They are willing to sacrifice themselves to harm Israel, but that's the situation. As to the north, it's only beginning now. We just started the discussions in order to make sure that apart from the operative and tactical achievements, the IDF and the government will know what they're doing and what they're striving for, because another village and another mountain, that's not the issue. But at the moment here too, I feel uncomfortable to explain to you things that you know better than anybody else in this country. But here too, simple solutions are not going to happen. There is a state which at the moment is really in a situation, there's no force that can even oppose the Hezbollah. Very low voices. So I think there are two facts. At the moment, we're doing the military action. We are cleaning the area, and chapeau to that. And the world, if they really want to see Lebanon, which used to be called the Switzerland of the Middle East, maybe the world has to come in and try to bring back Lebanon to where it was with all the complexity. Sykes-Picot, they ruined everything that can be ruined in this area. But still, if this is the state and if these are the borders, then within this state you have to do a restart to all this machine that worked in Lebanon in the 60s and the 70s before all these Palestinian terrorists came into it.
At this point, if we talk about Gaza and the general's plan, as you called it, could actually be a cover for direct occupation, and some people want that. And from my experience, you can't get victory there unless you create a civilian alternative. So how do you see that in Lebanon? Because for the first time, we see maybe the beginnings of the people who comprise Lebanon, the Sunni, the Christians. Maybe they're saying they'll appoint a prime minister, they'll have a different government, because if they have no strategy, we might get stuck there, and we have had a lot of experience getting stuck there in the past. Yes, that's what I've been saying about Lebanon. This is the time you're thinking that there is a strategy. This is your impression. Look, Israel certainly cannot anyone who would be mentioned by Israel as a candidate is immediately thought of as someone who is cooperating with us and will end his career then and there. But the United States, France, Germany, these are countries that certainly can try and do exactly the kinds of things you've been talking about, because for the past 2 years there was no government there, it's just an interim government, and Maron, the head of the parliament, is just busy sabotaging any initiative because he represents Hezbollah loyally. And if we have just this one thing, if there is a world community, if it still exists, then that is what it should be engaging in. As for Gaza, you said something very important just now. This plan, and I'm sorry, I'm calling it the general's plan. It doesn't have an official name, so I'm calling it that for now. It was presented in the Committee for Security and Foreign Affairs, and it won't surprise you if I say that it's very difficult for members of Knesset to agree. But the responses to this initiative were positive from both sides until one person came and said, yes, it will also then be able to inhabit the place, because anyone who really wants to bring this kind of disagreement into whether we should go back and have Jewish communities there or not, that will of course end any operative plan. So if we want to see a plan that consists of pressuring Hamas, having the hostages return, any attempts to set up an alternative government in Gaza, then we really should focus on those things and not in each person's individual dreams as to what it will look like in 10, 20 or 30 years' time. Right now, we can't find solutions for the next few years. There's just one thing that's really urgent. Any minute, every single minute that the hostages are still alive and they are there, they are suffering terribly. Just like Setnik said, that every minute there is like an eternity. So tomorrow is going to be an especially painful day. We can anticipate that, and yet how can we give them the hope that this timeline, which continues to extend, will actually make sure we'll be saving them? Look, as you can imagine, I have had, I don't know if hundreds, but many meetings with families of hostages. And at times I was there and I was optimistic, and at times I was less optimistic during them. And I must admit that 2 or 3 months ago I felt that at least as far as what's called the humanitarian release, the humanitarian deal will happen, but then that too unfortunately did not happen. And one thing that I have to say is that we shouldn't do. We should not lie to the families. We shouldn't give them false hopes. I have come across such incidents when they came out very encouraged from a meeting and they came back and said, but it can't be. Just now they said the deal is imminent, that it's going to happen next week. So I'm saying, and I'm speaking as someone who very much identifies with these families, we can't make them suffer more. We simply have to do everything we can to bring that day, make it happen as soon as possible. We can't just wait around for others to do it. And that's why we are also working with a negotiations team. We're working with the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense and the heads of the organizations, and we're looking all the time, checking to see whether there are any attempts to try and get a breakthrough, attempts to build another track and another track. We always have to remember that the people we're dealing with, is something that is really difficult to describe. It's not a normal negotiation. I'm not even talking about the technical aspect where you talk to the Qataris and the Egyptians and the Americans pressure them, and then they go and speak to the Hamas from outside Gaza, and then they either speak to Sinwar about it or they don't. But I'm talking about the essence. We are dealing with people who are living with completely different concepts. So we'll continue to try until all the hostages will return, as you've said. All those who are alive, it is very urgent to bring them back. We are, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, very likely before some retaliation or some sort of operation in Iran. And the question is, I mean, there's a complexity here. We have many opportunities on the one hand, but if we go into conflict with Iran, without even talking about the nuclear. This is like the head of the snake. It is the head of the octopus. Everyone here in this room understands that. How do you think that how can we go into this without going into the operative details? Look, first of all, in one sentence, you have presented the greatest dilemma. Obviously, Iran is the head of the snake. Everyone around us is a direct result. All these proxies are a direct result of Iranian activity. However, the question is, some are calling for that we should immediately go and kill the head of the snake. And there's another approach that says that this is a problematic plan because then you kill the head of the snake, but all the proxies around you will immediately rise up. By definition, they will immediately rise up and attack you, and then you're in a difficult position. So perhaps there's an opportunity here to clean the borders as much as possible from Hamas and Hezbollah and so on. And then, being more cool-minded, we'll be able to go for the Iranian aspect. And you must always remember that under the current state of affairs, as soon as they cross a line, and usually it's an invisible one, and I'm talking about a nuclear threshold state. And not everyone agrees with me, but I do define Iran as a nuclear threshold state. But another step they take, or if they take two more steps and they become sort of weapons grade, maybe it'll be too late. So these are the parameters, and I don't want to go into anything that is being said right now. But on the one hand, we need to do it quickly so that they won't get to the point of no return. But on the other hand, I'm not sure it's the greatest idea to add Iran to the mix actively, to make it another front, another arena that we will have to contend with as the IDF, the Mossad, the ISA, everyone else. I'm afraid that we are being told we must end, and time has run out. Time with you has flown, but I have a very, very important question for you. I know it's something that you've been engaging in, and it's going to be a core matter with the enlistment, which is something that may tear us up even more than external threats, because we can deal with external threats, but when we talk about the internal problems with allocation, with resources not being allocated properly, what do you think? Because you're the one who engages in this. My position has been very clear. I think that we cannot be in a situation where the reservists are on reserve duty 200 and 250 days and still going strong, and I don't even want to repeat the number of the days of reserve duty that behind closed doors were being promised for next year. It's not 200, 250, but still, it's way beyond what a student at the IDC or Reichman University or any other business owner will be able and would want to do. So we must make more people enlist. We need to make the pool greater, and the question is how. Now, for the last few months, as all of us, we've been living under a reality where there is a defense law, a security service law, which means that any ultra-Orthodox man who has reached the age can be enlisted. But I have not seen mass enlistment, and I've heard all these statements, including from heads of the defense establishment, that we don't need a law. There already is a law, the defense law, and based on this law, we can enlist. I've heard that from the Ministry of Defense. I've heard it from the IDF, I've heard it from the legal system, the Ministry of Justice. I haven't seen mass enlistment yet. So I assume there is a need for a law that will organize this matter. And it's not going to be anyone's euphoric dream. It's not going to be the fantasy of any ultra-Orthodox man who thinks that life has stopped on October 6th and we can continue to not serve. It may not be the ideal of the people who say, oh, they don't need any conditions, just like our children are being enlisted, their children should be too. We need, I guess, a profound social change just doesn't happen overnight. But I said very clearly, I just want a good law to come out of this committee. I'm not going to get a bad law out of it because it's already bad enough. So if we manage to put together, to get a majority for a good law, it'll happen, good legislation. And as for the guiding lines, the guidelines, I have it in my head, I have them on paper, but unfortunately I still see people trying to make their own individual dreams come true on both sides. But once the penny will drop, once they'll understand, they will have to just really realize that we need thousands more soldiers in every enlistment round, and that the ultra-Orthodox can certainly provide thousands more soldiers in every enlistment round, once that penny will drop, there'll be a law as well. It won't take long. The lines are clear. Just one more question. It's important for the audience to hear the answer to. The scope of the failures is extensive. Do you support a state committee, investigatory committee? I don't think there's any other way, there's any other tool. I said that about 11 months ago, dozens of times. I also think that it would have made it completely redundant. We already have enough tension around proper issues. This is just a completely unnecessary tension. The government should have announced that a state investigation committee will be set up. Maybe today, maybe in a month. We can argue about, well, maybe it'll be in 6 months. That's okay. That's debatable, but I don't see any other instrument. And I will tell you even more than that. As long as I am in my position, I will not give the classified minutes of the Committee for Defense and Foreign Affairs and for the Committee for the MIAs and POWs to any other committee that is not a state committee. Well, unfortunately, we must end, but MK Yuli Edelstein, Chairman of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, member of the Knesset, Edelstein. Thank you, Professor and Major General Gilead. There was talk here about conscription in Israel. Just want to remind everyone that 55% of this campus was conscripted for military duty. And I'm wondering how many years this can continue without help from others in the state of Israel. Once again, I'm honored to present Professor Ganor, founder and chairman of the Board of ICT and current president of Reichman University, to deliver his remarks.
Good evening, everybody. In my short talk, I'd like to deal with many issues that have to do with the war, the background, the characteristics, and the challenges Israel is facing. I want to share with you how I estimate the situation and how we should act in continuation. I have a very short time, so I'll just touch upon the subjects. I'll start with the report of ICT, which was completed about 6 months after the beginning of the war. The mayor actually spoke about it. In this report, we created a scenario that details the challenges that Israel will face if such a war is imposed on it by surprise. And I'll give you a few quotes. Hamas and Hezbollah, as opposed to the traditional armies, they do not spend too much time on planning. Some of their forces are based on the local people, Sajaiya and other places, the people from the neighborhood, and all of them. In this way, passing from daily life to emergency is very fast and doesn't give the IDF too much time to plan. And this is exactly what happened on October 7. In another quote is the day that the Hezbollah and Hamas are going to invade on the ground, and commando forces on settlements and on army bases in Israel creates another dimension that compels us already to be prepared on a defense, which is much more complicated. And this was exactly accurate, although the writers were afraid from an invasion that will come from the north, specifically. But the report also relates quite severely to the possibility that the invasion into Israel will happen from the south. And in this context, I think that we can determine that October 7, a terrible catastrophe occurred, unprecedented in the state of Israel. That terrible Shabbat, 1,145 people were murdered, thousands of people were injured, and 250 people were abducted to Gaza. But the fact that it didn't happen in the north, or even parallelly in both arenas, because then the disaster would have been even greater. The report didn't deal only with the threats, but also in the gaps of the Israeli preparedness. It said, for example, that in routine, only those defensive guards in the settlements, the people themselves are not armed. The people in the kibbutzim, they don't have any possibility to defend themselves. And in another quote, it says that the settlements are not an army. Their tactical position there is very important. Therefore, you have to give them arms and to turn them into armed settlements. The insights of this report were presented to all the decision makers in the state of Israel in hundreds of meetings we had at them, but the reaction of most of them was between really listening and mostly just underestimating, just dealing with it and very, very casually. They did not expect such an activity. The Prime Minister didn't even meet us. In hindsight, it seems that the security forces and the decision makers, they were suffering from hybris. That was their sin. And just before the disaster on October 6th, they were so. But today I think it's different. I think that on the background of the unprecedented achievements of Israel against the Hezbollah in the last 2 weeks, we again are suffering from hybris. Why? Because it's reflected also on the criticism of some of the journalists on our report. They claim that in view of the very limited rocket and missiles attack, then the report must have exaggerated the threat that Israel is facing. I dispute that, because the scenario that was described in our report was against a barrage of missiles of Hezbollah and a full-wage war. And this time, Israel was the one that surprised Hezbollah in this war. And we have to remember also that although we do have a lot of achievements until now, we are still in the beginning of a war. One of the real criticism was of my friend Aryeh Eldad, a journalist who published an article before the holiday. He said, how did we win despite of the prediction of he said on February 24, the ICT and the Reichman University published a report where 140 people spent 3 years, and of course, Elad comes from the right wing, but he said that those who see dark, who are pessimists, they were exaggerating. He also said that my criticism is not just in hindsight, because we still don't know how it's going to end. I wouldn't bother to base myself on him unless he was explaining to his readers the motive that was behind those who were really spreading alarm, because he said they, meaning us, did it in order to prevent Israel to attack the Hezbollah, in order to push the decision makers to come to an agreement which is only in their imagination. It's not even real. What a shame that the reality is completely different to his interpretation. It's exactly the opposite. And with your permission, I will expose for the first time the 6th chapter of this report of the ICT. We never published it until today. This was written by a team of specialists headed by the deputy director, and it was the preemptive attack against the Hezbollah. The first sentence actually talks about the whole thing. It says, in view of the real threats that are coming from Iran and Hezbollah, and in view of the scenario that may happen, Israel should consider a preemptive attack against Hezbollah in order to reduce the threat, which is unprecedented, which is now developing in the north. So our recommendation was exactly that. It seems that the report of the ICT is apparently the only serious piece of work that was done in Israel before October 7, 2023, who looked into the threat and recommended to the decision maker to actually wage war, a preemptive war against Hezbollah. When we presented this conclusion to one of the very high-positioned security officer, he determined, no Prime Minister in Israel is not going to accept your recommendation, because if he does, he will find himself under investigation, under interrogation. We said the opposite. Any Prime Minister who will not consider this will find himself in that position.
With your permission, let us go back to the attack on October 7th. I would like to say now the things I have said right after the invasion to Israel's south is that Iran was the one who funded, planned, and carried out through its Palestinian proxy, Hamas and Jihad, the October 7 attack. I would like to go as far as to estimate that Iran also set the date for the attack. And why did Iran do so? For three reasons. The first is revenge for all the years of Israeli activity, an activity that was attributed to Israel against Iran. Second reason was because it wanted to divert the world attention from the efforts and the promotion of the steps to become a nuclear state. But the main reason was that it knew that Israel was just steps away from normalization in Saudi Arabia and the establishment of a NATO-like alliance, a regional alliance that will counter it. And indeed, on the days before October 7th, the media said that the IRGC met with Palestinian Hamas and Jihad in Beirut. What did they discuss? They probably discussed the details of the attack against Israel and coordinated their positions. Iran could have attacked Israel directly or through its stronger proxy, Hezbollah. However, it would have risked the writing being on the wall. Its responsibility for the invasion of Israel would have been clear and would have resulted in a retaliation. So they decided to sacrifice the Palestinians on the altar of its interests, and now it's sacrificing the Lebanese. The fingerprint of Iran is shown because the Hamas outline was a complete replica of the Red One force in plan of invasion, a plan that was prepared together with the IRGC. And against the backdrop of this, you can see the coordinated denial on the hours of days after the incursion made by Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, saying that Iran and Hezbollah did not even know of the plan, allegedly, of Sinwar, and therefore are not responsible for it. We shouldn't underestimate Iran. It is a player that is strategic in its thinking, and they play chess, and chess is a strategic game. It's a game where you don't just plan one step ahead, you plan several steps ahead. Based on what? Based on an estimation of what the response of your adversary will be. And the question is, what did the Iranians expect Israel to do following October 7th? I think the answer is exactly what Israel did, to occupy the Gaza Strip and to get into a war of attrition. The Iranians could have just clapped their hands happily when Prime Minister defined this total victory as a goal, instead of talking about the day after. And because of this conduct, what should Israel have done? It should immediately have striven for an agreement to release all the hostages even before going into Gaza, to get all the reservists on duty. And once Hezbollah decided to step up, to go and have a preemptive attack against Hezbollah. Israel could have already back then used all the resources that it had prepared against Hezbollah, but at the time, the IDF was prepared We had enough soldiers, we had many reservists. Now we don't have as many. The ammunition reserves were full. Israel had international support. National resilience was strong, as was the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, I would like to say something controversial. Despite the Prime Minister's statements from day one, Israel was not facing an existential war on October 7th, 8th, or any time since then. And maybe it will surprise some of you, but the withdrawal from Philadelphia corridor is not existential either. Swords of Iron War was, until not too long ago, a justified and legitimate war, but one that was voluntary, one that we could have chosen, a direct result of an Israeli decision designed to achieve important goals for Israel. And we must be reminded of this, especially today, because we're about to have a direct, comprehensive conflict with Iran that may lead to a war of no other choice, or an existential war. And please don't misunderstand me. Israel has been facing existential threats by many enemies, and they'll only stop if Israel will sign peace agreements with all of its enemies, one that are near us and one that are further away. Perhaps it won't happen during our lifetime. There's a difference between existential threats and existential war. Israel for a year has chosen to deplete much of its power and resources vis-a-vis the tactical threat of Hamas, instead of facing and handling the existential threat of Hezbollah and Iran. And now, a year later, it is beginning to face that. So what does the future hold? I always told my students that in the Middle East, you can't be a prophet. But if we need to prophesize, then prophesize for the later future. Because by then, nobody will remember if you were correct. And if you were correct, you could have said, I told you so. So despite that, I will risk and say that I think Israel will respond to this last severe Iranian attack against Israel. If I were able to advise the Israeli decision makers, I would say that our response must be meaningful and painful to Iran. The quality of the action is more important than how rapidly it will be done. No sovereign state can just continue as if nothing happened after an attack like last week's. But we have to say to Iran, clearly, if your proxies, the Houthis, the Shiite militias or Hezbollah, will try to hurt infrastructure in Israel, those who send them in Iran will not live. However, at the same time, we must reiterate that the Israeli response, no matter what it is, must be coordinated fully with the United States. The Biden administration has proven long ago, time and time again, that it supports Israel unconditionally. They have done that more than any other American administrations, even at times when it faced criticism by Israeli leaders. The Americans have their own interests domestically and internationally, and Israel must consider them while it strives to achieve its own goals and interests. At the same time, Israel must immediately strive for ending the war in Gaza and for reaching a deal for the return of all hostages. Perhaps these two goals are intertwined, and they must be carried out with the coordination of the United States and with a deal of all hostages. This would have been a good deal that should have been done months ago, and that will allow Israel to concentrate its efforts in war against the existential and meaningful threats instead of becoming exhausted by a meaningless war. Israel must coordinate the change of regime in Gaza to work together with the United States in order to establish the second NATO alliance together with the Sunni states and under the CENTCOM command, and to allow the United States to lead the restoration processes in Gaza. Whoever restores it will be able to rule it. So we need to begin by a hostage deal for all hostages. Such a deal is not the problem, it is the solution. An all hostage deal will also end the war in the south. It's not only the best solution, it is the most value-based and the only moral solution for bringing the hostages home, but it is also the point of departure for making the ties with the United States stronger and also promoting the interests of the United States and the Arab states. It is really the cornerstone of our counter-attack against Iran. This is something that could have implications for the present and the future. To conclude, I would like to pray for the health and safety of IDF soldiers, many of whom are students and alumni of the Reichman University, and may all hostages return immediately. Have a happy new year, and for the IDF too.
Thank you, Professor Ganor, for your words of wisdom. And after hearing your remarks, I would say that this country has a few things on their plate right now. We're living through history. And now it is my pleasure to invite member of Knesset Yair Lapid, former Prime Minister, who is currently serving as leader of the opposition and chairperson of the Yesh Atid party. Lapid has held key positions in government, including Minister of Finance, Foreign Affairs, and alternate Prime Minister. Before entering politics, he was a well-known journalist, author, and TV presenter, member of the Knesset. Lapid, the floor is yours.
Shalom lachem.
Hello, everybody. Tomorrow is October 7. It's not a date. It's a lump which is stuck in the throat of all of us. The trauma is not the worst thing that happened to us. The trauma is just this closed box that we're trying to hold forcefully, this terrible thing that happened to us, but it did. Everything we remember and know happened, the terror, the terrible anxiety, and the dead and the injured. We have to make sure that the hostages will come home one day. About 3 years ago, March 2022, I stood on the podium in the Negev, close to the tomb of Ben Gurion, and I stood with the foreign minister of Morocco and Egypt and Jordan, and we were talking about work groups and the workshops. This was a moment of Israeli force, Israeli strength. A year ago, October 6, 23, the judicial reform or the coup was the minute of the Israeli weakness. A minute where our enemies said to themselves, this is the time to attack Israel. It will never be weaker than it is now. When was Israel attacked? When did they think there was an opportunity? When we were less democracy, less state of law, less liberal, less loyal to our promise to ourselves to live by the values of the scroll of liberation. This is not coincidental. The moment we were less democratic, we also got the hardest blow, terrible blow in our history. This is the question we have to ask ourselves today. What is the source of Israeli strength? What is the Israeli weakness? What works? What doesn't work? When did deterrence work? When did the enemy look at us and what they saw is strength, and what caused them 3 years ago to the Western world and the Arab world to look at Israel to say, these you cannot, they're invincible, you cannot conquer them. And the answer is that they saw technological sophistication, the Technion, the Weizmann Institute, they saw an alliance unprecedented with Americans. They saw how this partnership is reflected in our strength. They saw the best air force in the world with laser, with the missile perception. They saw a high-tech economy that enables us to hold the army and develop it. And they saw a middle class that is strong and patriotic and can give money. They saw the only model in the world that's really successful, the liberal democracy with high technology. And they saw a state that is not managed by fear and paranoia, but by originality and audacity. We believed in ourselves. We believed in one another. So they believed in us too. And we thought that freedom and human rights and the rule of law is our internal strength. And they looked at us and they saw that we're really strong. Our enemies believe only force. This is our main weakness. We understand science, technology, and strategic thinking. We understand how the state should look, that our children will live in another 50 years. We understand that democracy is not just better than an extreme messianic religious state. You have to be strong, you have to be creative, liberal, curious, tolerant. This is the source of our strength, no other. What is really worrisome is that even a year after the disaster, the lessons were learned. Where Ben Gvir and Smotrich and all these messianic group, they offer us to repeat the question that weakened us, to give up the whole infrastructure of Israeli strength. They say, let us talk in the only language that they hear in the Middle East. Let's go crazy. We'll bomb Gaza. We'll drop an atom bomb and we'll kill women and children. That's the way they talk in Channel 14 in the extreme. Forget morality for a moment. Forget but the fact that this is not a Jewish discourse at all. This is appalling. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't deter the Hamas. It doesn't deter the Hezbollah or the Iranians. The only ones who are alarmed by that are our allies. Our enemies are very happy with it. The BDF is happy. They were doing their job for them. The Iranians and the anti-Semite terror groups on campus, they're happy. Every time Israel behaves like its enemies, then their job is easier. It means that they managed to drag us to the place where they wanted us to be, that we should be like them. This makes them closer to the point that the whole world is against us and puts us close to the situation that any army did actually rifts the Israeli society. If Hassan Nasrallah, he was killed by a modern army that somebody told them that they will go to hell. So they did. They killed Hassan Nasrallah and they went to protect the only country that they have to protect because it is just and it is in a war against religious fanaticism, not sent by a religious fantastic. I'm talking about the pilots, the civil society. They say to themselves that they're not fighting for the government, they're fighting for the state. But this separation is not going to hold water for a long time, neither for the world or the Israeli society. A government which actually dismantles the police, the courts, the international law, human rights, also diminishes our technological edge and our initiative, the investments, all the foundations of Israeli strength. It goes together. You cannot separate the two. The goal of the state of Israel is not eternal war. The goal is life, to live in a state which is good, colorful, innovative, fascinating, fair, believes in human freedom, and is part of the 10 countries in the modern world. But Messianic Israel that speak in the language of the Middle East, there'll be no high-tech. It will not get F-35s from Americans, and it's not going to win. It's going to be only bereavement and death and nothing else. Democracy is not weakness. It is an engine of power. The decision to be the only democracy in the Middle East did not derive from the fact that we didn't understand where we're living, but because we did understand. We looked around and we saw the only way we can cope with all these radical forces that want to eliminate that is to win over them, to be exactly the opposite, and to believe in freedom, to fight on behalf of the free world. Hamas and Hezbollah in Iran and Syria and Yemen are better than us in order to be ignorant and radical and revengeful. That's where they live. That's their national place. If you want to know what a state looks that talks the language of the Middle East, just go north. Look at Lebanon, look at Syria. That's where it's going to get to. We are much better than they are in order to be westernized and sophisticated and technological. We know exactly how to make allies with the strongest countries in the world. We know how to build a country and a strong society based on ideas of equal opportunities. If we be like so, we will win. If we be like that, they have no chance against us. This state was incepted after the Holocaust. Zionism is the most incredible enterprise of the 20th century because we didn't sink in blood. We didn't waste our lives on revenge. We built, we created a wonderful place. We didn't just fight for anything, it's fight for what we believe in. Israel is the best country. All we have to do is just to go back to our sources, to be Jews and Zionists and liberal and democratic, because this is our worldview, because these are our values, and also because this is the only way to win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member of Knesset Yair Lapid, for spending quality time with us. And it is now my pleasure to open the ceremony for the inauguration of the Sheleg Chair in Crisis Management at Reichman University. Allow me to present Colonel Reserve's Advocate Lior Lotan, the incumbent of the Sheleg Academic Chair in Crisis Management at Reichman University. He is a senior researcher and former executive director at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism at Reichman University. Colonel Lotan is recognized as one of the world's leading experts in hostage barricade situations, crisis management, and negotiations. Colonel Lotan served as an officer in Israel's Special Forces units, commanded the IDF hostage negotiation team, served as the Prime Minister's envoy on the kidnapping and missing persons unit, most recently as an advisor to the Minister of Defense. He is in touch. He is actually, where are you, Lior? Oh, there you are. So what I wanted to say about Lior is that he's actually a touch of class and an officer and a gentleman in the Churchillian and Zionist spirit. And we are proud to welcome Lior Lotan back to Reichman University. We wish him great success for the new Sheleg Academic Chair in Crisis Management and Research. And Professor Ganor here managed, like a good NBA team, to find another star who knows how to score three-point shots, but he also takes rebounds and does a lot of assists.
Thank you very much, Davis. It's really a boost to my ego to come here every time. The president and founder of Reichman University, Professor Reichman, president of Reichman University and founder of the ICT, Professor Ganor, and Professor Amos Gilead. I'm just adding you because it's wonderful to say professor to you. Our partners to the founding of the Sheleg Chair, master of the ceremony, the legendary Jonathan Davis, the faculty, the members, the staff, and the volunteers of the ICT who have been doing this for 24 years, and all the participants, friends, and my dear family who's here. In most of the ICT conferences, I would sit or stand on the stage as a moderator, but now I'm standing here with a special feeling because I feel like I'm a partner, I'm a comrade on a voyage. Today we mark the inception of a new chair, the Sheleg Chair in Crisis Management. And the idea is that crises can be analyzed and researched so that insights will come out of them and will create methodologies and tools for better handling crises in the future. We believe strongly in the power of academic knowledge and research and in the advantage of academic discourse between the executive bodies, the research bodies, experts and academics. It's not a new trailblazing approach, it's a basic, fundamental one of both Reichman University and the ICT since its establishment. But what this is new, what the new aspect of it is what we're focusing on. The Sheleg Chair in Crisis Management will focus on defense and military crises, public crises, social crises, and complex business crises. The global crises are becoming more and more complex, and the data speaks for itself. In 2003, the total amount spent on military and defense in the world was $2.25 trillion. That's a terrible piece of finding which shows that there is uncertainty and we cannot rely on defense. The type of defense has changed, but the building blocks are always ideological, political, social, economic, religious. And take, for instance, in the 20th century, the Cold War, the struggle between the United States and Russia and the Soviet Union was the main catalyst for uncertainty and instability and many other crises. The nuclear race led to the missile crisis in Cuba. The struggle for domination led to the wars in Korea and Vietnam. The struggle against proxies have also led to disputes and conflicts in Asia, Africa, and Europe. In the 21st century, we see how the United States and Russia and China are all sort of fighting for domination, and we see it in the southern Chinese Sea and in Eastern China, in Eastern Asia, and also for the dispute for technologies, AI and cyber and robotics. In the 20th century, it was decolonization processes, many countries struggling to liberate themselves from European rule, which created unstable borders and waves of immigration. In the 21st century, it's climate changes, droughts, changes in sea level, and also religious extremism, radical terrorism, that also lead to a lot of social tension, a lot of instability, and a sense of insecurity in many countries around the world. In 2023, there have been more over 100 million refugees. In the 20th century, we used to fight for natural resources. Now we're fighting for water, for the basics for food. In the 20th century, technology led to weapons in land, sea, and air, and advanced weapons. In the 21st century, technology led to cyber, without having to use military force. It is already impacting government, infrastructure, global economics. Between 2014 and 2023, 67% more cyber strikes between countries that are intended to hurt infrastructure like transport and water. But in the 21st century, in the era of globalization and information, global crises also include new building blocks that we have not known before. AI, the domination of social media, It's taking over our perception of reality. Populist regimes, bigger pandemics like the COVID, and lack of trust in governments and state institutions leading to incitement. All of these factors, old and new, go hand in hand, impact one another, and create fertile ground for complex international and conflicts. For instance, in a global world of a global economy, economic sanctions on one country because of the role it plays in instability in its own region creates a rise in commodities, the price of commodities in other areas that are completely different and separate around the world. And therefore, we need to come up with global solutions. We need an interdisciplinary approach to it, an approach that uses content from many disciplinaries: legal, economic, diplomatic, psychological, economic, and so on. That will be the kind of sphere that our chair will focus on. And the aim of this chair is, just like Max Weber said, that science is an area that prepares people for decisions, for understanding the price of those decisions. And this is what the chair will focus on. It will try to understand the phenomenon of crisis and to prepare for it. And therefore, the purposes of this chair are as follows. First, to develop new instruments to understand the crises of the present and to create effective solutions to work with them, to grapple with them. We need to also create a policy. That's the second goal of the chair. And the third is to train the leaders of the future and the organizations to prepare for future crises. The ways of operation will, of course, be academic research, think tanks, simulations, conferences, and training workshops. The values of the chair will be to rely on data and methodology, clarity of ideas, interdisciplinarity, creativity, and great collaboration and exchange of information with other institutes and similar organizations around the world. To conclude, 3 personal remarks. The first is that the basic partners of this chair from the beginning of the idea and until the work plan are Professor Ganor and Sir Ehud Sheleg, who are sitting in this room. Yes, they do deserve that round of applause. Usually, basic partners define the point of departure, where you begin your journey. But in our case, they are so involved. They clearly define the building blocks and the milestones ahead, and also the aim of this journey. So not only where we're starting from, but where we want to reach. And for their faith, for their professionality, for their charity, and for the long years of friendship that does not fail, I would like to thank you. The second, over the last 3 decades, I have participated under various positions in main places in Israel as a combat soldier, as the envoy for negotiations, and as an advisor for decision makers. On the way, I've accumulated many experiences and much knowledge. I have understood why a sharp sword is important, but also why it is important during crisis to have ammunition, to have shock blocks, shock absorbers, and to have trust between leaders. Steve Jobs said that you cannot connect the dots of your life looking ahead, but only retrospectively. And when I stand here and look retrospectively, the dots that I have had in terms of dealing with conflict and crisis connect. And I continue to engage in crisis now by enhancing the 4th leg, which is academic research and its practical implication. And I feel and believe that just like any engineering organization that is stronger on 4 legs than on 3, so is the chair that we're inaugurating today. And the third remark is that we Israelis have been at war for the past year, and it has many facets. And these facets have to do with all of us, the faces of soldiers and civilians who are all heroes. The faces of the wounded, the faces of the fallen, the faces of those who have been displaced, the faces of families, of all of those and our families. But among them, prominent are the faces of 101 Israeli hostages still being held captive in Gaza. I wish from here that all hostages will return, so that all their families will immediately see the Prophet Jeremiah's vision come true, who prophesied here in Israel 2,600 years ago, at the end of the Second Temple and after the destruction of it. Prophet Jeremiah, in chapter 31, worded our vision. And the Lord said that you should stop crying, because you will see your reward, and there is hope for you yet, and your sons will return. Thank you very much.
Forward to a one-on-one discussion with an honorable and prestige guest, which is a very impressive person that I learned to know in the last few years. Roger Carstens is Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. He was previously Deputy Assistant Secretary in the State Department Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Prior to this, Carstens was Country Director in Amman, Jordan, for Blumen, a US-based NGO providing humanitarian assistance and support to Syrian refugees. Earlier in his career, he was the Senior Civilian Advisor on the Counterinsurgency Advisory and Assistance Team in Afghanistan, a Senior Fellow at the Center for New American Security, and Special Assistance for Legislative Affairs in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Roger Carstens is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel who served in Special Forces and 1st Ranger Battalion, which make him and brothers in arms. Roger, please. I know that we all focus in our issue in Gaza, which is the most important experience that we are facing this time, but I want to light some dots in the background and maybe ask you, Roger, to your view and your idea regarding the way to connect these dots. In the beginning of the 21st century, we already saw the attempt of a terror organization to create a scenario, create a situation that delete the ability of the state to confront it efficiently. For example, in the event in Dubrovka Theater in Moscow in 2002, and in Beslan High School in 2004, and then in Mumbai in 2008, and then later on in Algiers and in Kenya, we saw an attack of dozens of perpetrators from the terror organization, trying to create a tactic scenario that will leave the government with no alternative, with no efficient way of dealing with this threat. Another aspects of this phenomena, gaining hundreds of hostages. They started in Dubrovka, more than 700, and then later on in Beslan, those were Chechen rebels, more than 1,000, and then later on some element of Al-Qaeda coming from Pakistan, crossed the way to Mumbai in India, taking more than 6 simultaneously target, trying to create a situation that the government have no alternative but to surrender to the extortion of this organization. And then we saw the third layer, demands that going directly to the policy and national strategy and interest of the country. This is not anymore about releasing of prisoners. This is about telling the country you have no solution for our demand and you need to obey. So in these aspects, what we saw in 7 October last year have some similarity. There was hundreds and thousands of perpetrators from Hamas taking hundreds of Israeli hostages back to Gaza Strip, trying to eliminate any tactical option from the Israeli Authority. We understand that these thoughts are new. This is not all terrorism. This is attempt of new terrorism, of new radical organization to set a situation that government are practically lack of any good alternative. From your position as a senior American figure, senior American official that deal with this phenomena, what is your way or your concept to connect these dots or to reveal this new phenomena? How is it a real threat to a state that found themselves hostages as a state, not as only an organization? And what do you see, what do you consider as our main challenges dealing with this threat?
Boy, thank you. It's an incredible question and a great setup to provide context. But before, again, if I may, I'd first like to thank Reichman University for bringing us all together, the Judasman Foundation for bringing us together. I see Boaz in there. You're the only other person wearing a tie. Am I okay if I take my tie off? You're wearing a tie. I'm not sure if I can get away with this. Thank you. So I'm taking this thing off. It's killing me. But I want to thank everyone for getting us together. It's an incredible chance to come and share ideas and perspectives. And these things are important. As you said, they kind of get into the foundations of civilization and also the survival of countries that are trying to do the right thing and trying to live as the rules of law and civilization would ask us. But I'd also like to, before I even begin, I'd like to also say that I'm grateful that we have a chance to honor Idan Shtivi, a member of Reichman University, held hostage in Gaza, and also, of course, the person that I met 2 or 3 years ago, Shabtai, my Hebrew is horrible, by the way, please forgive me, Shabtai Shavit, who I had a chance to listen to. And Boaz, you might remember, I actually was sitting next to him and got to listen to him on a question I asked for about 30 minutes, and I walked away feeling like I was drinking from the fountain of wisdom. The information that he gave me, in a way, is the answer to my question. And that is, in a way, these problems aren't that old. They've been around since 4,500 years. If you read the old texts, whether it's the Bible, the Torah, if you want to read Thucydides, Herodotus, you'll find these cases where nation states or terrorist groups take hostages and through their actions try to grind other countries to a halt. The great thing is I've met you, and you and I have known each other for 3 years. I've known Boaz for 3 years when I came here working with you to try to figure out ways to bring at that time 4 Israeli hostages home. The fact that you were thinking about that, the fact that you have had a role in doing this already says that we're kind of ahead of the power curve. Now, it may not seem like it. It may seem that we're always on our back step, but I take a look at the history of Israel, and I can take a look at the history of the United States and other countries in dealing with this. Number one, there's a position where there's a hostage negotiator in this country. There's a position in mine. Other countries also are creating positions, whether it's Germany, Australia, or the United Kingdom. We're also starting to get smarter about working together, both on the hostage side of the house, which terrorist groups taking people, and on the wrongful detention side of the house, where nation states are taking people hostages. So give me about 30 seconds and I'll be quiet and get ready for the next question. Here's the way we solve this. Already we've been working together on the hostage side of the house to bring together countries that we can make sure that when something happens, we can quickly come together and militarily, on the law enforcement side and on the diplomatic side, come up with ways to prevent something like something that happened in the past, the Achille Lauro incident, or something that happened almost 1 year ago. And again, I'm grateful that Boaz, you had the courage to hold this conference, because a lot of people might not have. You're all here because we have courage. We can't let the terrorists run and rule our lives. Thank you for keeping this conference on. And at the same time, we commemorate what happened on October 7th of last year. But the bottom line is, on the terrorist side, we're already coming together to solve these more complex problems. It's going to take some time, but I think the work that we're now doing behind the scenes to fight terrorism, when it's multiple nations, multinational efforts, and things are become more challenging over time and distance, we're going to get there, and you know that. We know how the story ends. The story ends with us being victorious, period, full stop. The second thing is, on nation states, we have a very robust prevention and deterrence effort right now, where countries are coming together to go to the other countries that take our citizens hostages in I would say, a serial hostage-taking way, be it Russia, Venezuela, and a few others, to try to thwart them by raising the costs of them doing so in a way that makes this problem go away in the next 10 years. So that's a rather long answer, but my short answer is, the great part is, you and I, from your special forces background and your negotiating background, we know how this ends. We have just got to keep organizing and outmaneuvering, out-adapting, out-thinking, and out-resourcing the enemies out there that would try to grind us to a halt.
I wanted to say, thank you, Roger. I wanted to say that we share values as American and Israeli, but obviously we share, I hope so, the same spirit as you all could identify. Napoleon said that he wants his general to be also lucky, not only talent. And in your position, I think you are the most lucky one, because recently, this year, you accomplished the most complicated and large and sophisticated deal, let's say, that ever been in this subject, in this field, since the Cold War. The deal with Russia, the multiplayer. I want you, if you can share with us some of the logic, the strategy behind this operation, the main challenges, and can we learn from it some lesson learned regarding multiplayers arena, because this is what we are facing now in our region.
No, it's a great question. This is one where I'd love to take credit, but I can't. As you will know from your time doing this, it sometimes seems like one person does it, when in reality there's 1,000 people that pulled this together. And I have to give full credit to the White House, guys like Jake Sullivan, our national security advisor, the president for making the hard decision to get things across the finish line. But this was a problem set where early on we figured that what the Russians wanted and what we wanted, it was not going to add up mathematically, and the weight of what they wanted and the weight that what we could deliver and want, it wasn't equal. And that's when we started to search for other things that the other side might want, and we had to go outside of the United States. And we were grateful to find partners, and I hope I don't leave anyone out, but like Norway, Poland, Slovenia, Turkey, and Germany, who were able to bring their resources together to either provide a venue for us to do this, or be willing to offer people that they had captured on their soil to go into the deal. And we called it enlarging the problem. If the problem couldn't be solved bilaterally between us and the Russians, maybe there was a way to extend beyond to other countries to bring in other resources. And we were grateful that we had partners and allies that were willing to come to our aid. And I think a lot of it gets down into the relationship that our president has with the senior leaders of these countries. It gets into the relationship that our country has. But these countries that I mentioned were willing to go the extra step to assume political risk in their own countries to provide some help to the United States. As you might imagine, it was painstaking, took long, I would say way too long, because you know, if you're a prisoner that's held in IK-17 out in Siberia, every day counts. But we were eventually able to marshal something to pull off a deal that I think when it happened raised a lot of eyebrows. Wasn't easy. but I think it was entirely worth it. And maybe the lesson that you were kind of driving towards, what do we get out of this? I think when you are approaching a hostage situation or a wrongful detainee situation, someone who's arbitrarily detained by another country, you really have to think creatively. And I know you get this, but when you're thinking creatively, sometimes it's hard to express this to senior leaders because it seems very there's a lot of risk involved. And you have to find ways to communicate how you're going to manage the risk, put the risk down, and still get it done. So I got to give full credit to the President, the National Security Council, for embracing this risk, conducting negotiations, driving it through. Got to give a lot of credit to our partners and allies who are willing to make this happen. But it's a lesson, I would say, in terms of creatively. I don't want to say thinking out of the box. That's almost too small. It's almost like thinking out of the box. You're already creating a small thing there. But it's truly trying to widely look at a problem and figure out how to best to get it done. And I know you've been there. And the hardest part is selling the idea to everyone to get them comfortable with it.
Roger, since you unleash your tie, I will go more direct. Can you share with us from your vast experience, how can we, kick-start a stuck process? A process which the other side, feeling from any reason, from strength to other interests, that he doesn't want to participate, that there is no other side, but we need him to participate nevertheless. So how can you share with us some lesson learned or some experience on this specific topic? Because I believe that we are now facing such a bumper in the process.
I think every case is different, as you well know from your time doing this. I would say what's worked for us, and it seems counterintuitive, but when we reach out to the other side, we always do so with some semblance of respect. And the people that we talk to are pretty tough characters. And you might not think that you want to show them respect. You might think that they have a track record which makes them the kind of people that would go into this category which you never want to have a conversation. But the bottom line is, to solve this problem, you must talk to them. And so I found that when I show respect to the other side, I meet them and I'm very real with them. I don't take, as in the Army, we used to call this the knife hand, where you point at someone's chest and say, your human rights record's horrible. You're bad. You're doing this bad. You're doing this bad. And instead, if I listen to them air their problems and I seriously consider them, suddenly we get into a position where we can start having a better communication. The crazy thing is it's not really taught. In a barricade situation, like, has everyone seen a movie where the bankers or the bad guys go in to rob a bank, the police show up, and the bankers or the bad guys are suddenly caught inside the bank, and the FBI comes out and they negotiate? You can kind of teach that, but I think you get into situations where you're beyond teaching, and it goes from preparing mathematically for that negotiation, but the second you walk in the room, show respect, be willing to adapt, and then start also thinking intuitively. You have to start embracing the fact that when you walk in that room, your first move you can think of, moves 2, 3, and 4 are going to almost have to come from your gut and your intuition on how best to drive that conversation. By the way, can I say, I feel bad you asking me that, because this is the man with all the experience. I feel like when I met him, I was a plebe at West Point coming up to a senior person and asking him, how do you get this done? But yeah, I would dare say that when I sit next to you, I feel like I'm talking to the expert.
Thank you for that. The same is here. It's mutual, fully mutual. I know that you invest a lot on the relationship with the families, on the humanitarian aspects, and we are talking a lot operational, negotiation, even policy, and how we can sell something to the blue side, our side, and then sell it to the red side, the other side. Can you share with us something from the humanitarian aspects of hostages, of families that have no certainty, even no faith that they will eventually come to the good side of this crisis? Can you share with us some of your understanding, philosophy, and lesson learned in this aspect, the humanitarian aspects of this crisis?
I'm going to do that, and I see someone keep putting up a sign saying we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to talk quickly, but I know there are translations going on, so I'll see if I can make this happen. So here we go. What we try to do is embrace the families. I spend 1 to 4 hours, 7 days a week, talking to family members. Today, I spent a few hours talking to family members. Tomorrow, it'll be more family members. They may be family members whose loved ones are held in Syria, Russia, China, but I'm going to invest time in embracing them. And if they call me at 10 o'clock tonight, I'm going to answer the phone, and I'm not going to hang up until we're done, even if that's 3 in the morning. I'm going to stay on the phone, and they're going to see that I'm not faking it, because as you well know, this is a business that you can't fake. You either believe it in your heart that that family member is important and you're going to do anything you can to get their loved one home, or they're going to know it. They smell fakery. So the big thing is we try to hire people that are empathetic, compassionate, and passionate, and we connect them with the families, and the families soon know that they're going to get everything they can from us. And it's important to build up that trust, that even though I'm the government, and usually we're kind of cold and distant, instead we're going to flip that and be the government that's going to be crying with you, embracing you, declassifying information to give you a sense of where we are on the battlefield, the map sheet. And we want that relationship of trust. Even when you give bad information, I've had to call families and tell them something bad happened. And when they ask me, well, Roger, what's plan B? I'm like, well, plan B is not that good. We're going to have to work it out. And you don't want to do that. You want to make them feel good, but this is not a feel-good business. The families want to feel good for 45 days. Day 46 and on, they just want the truth. They want to know that you're in it, and they want to know where we are in the map sheet and getting stuff done. But the story I would share is this. There was a night, on a Friday night, I got a call from a family, and it was like 9 or 10, and it was a mother who was just frustrated that I wasn't making it down to Caracas, Venezuela. And she was screaming at me and yelling at me, and I just take it because I look at it this way. Her son's held. I'm responsible for getting her son back. Her son's not back. Therefore, that's my problem. And so if she wants to get mad at me, I'm going to take it all and just embrace it and try to be loving as I possibly can. And that's a weird thing, right? I'm with the government, but my job is to throw love at these families. So after she got done, she said, at the very end, she said, Roger, I just don't understand why you cannot get to Caracas. I mean, when are you going to talk to the Venezuelans again? And I said, look, I'm working it. I really am. We're trying to get a trip together. Do me a favor. Let's talk next Wednesday, and let's see if we can connect a little bit, and I'll try to give you a better sense of where we are. What I could not tell her is that tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I was flying to Caracas, and by about 1700, I would have her son on a flight coming back to the United States of America. Why couldn't I tell her that? As you well know, things go wrong at the last second. Until you've cleared Venezuelan airspace, you don't have a victory. So once we clear, I can sit there and go, whew, we can get the president to call the family, and they can get a sense. But the point is that I would like to say is that the families need to be met where they are with love and empathy. And sometimes you have to take a beating from them, and that's okay. That's part of our jobs. It's our duty and responsibility. But there's always that day when they're about to get a victory, and it comes. I've had the pleasure of having tough conversations with families, knowing very well that in a week or two, this was coming to a screeching halt. And my fervent prayer, and I pray a lot on that, because I'm not smart enough to outsmart the people that I negotiate with. I actually do a lot of praying to see if I can get some extra help on that. But my fervent prayer is that we all figure out how to come to an accommodation and bring all those who are held in Gaza home, and so that those family members can get that same feeling that it doesn't seem like it's going well, and then one day the breakthrough comes and you bring them home.
Roger, to hear Special Forces brothers saying that my job is to throw love to this family just demonstrate to me that we live a long life and we managed to pass it all and reach to this phase of more sensitive and sophistication. Just to close this session, you are a soldier and you are a senior diplomat, very experienced young one. And I want to tell you that anyone in this audience, from this audience, is appreciate tremendously the American effort and the American contribution to our effort to repatriate our guys, civilians, men and women from Gaza. As a diplomat, as a soldier, as a practitioner, as a senior American official, what can you tell us about this crisis? What can you, I know what you wish for us, but what can you tell us on this aspect?
Okay, so this is the hard one that if it's a sensitive negotiation, I can't tell you too much because it's sensitive. The other part where we are, strangely, CNN does a pretty good job of picking up most of the details of this. So there's probably not much I can add, but here's what I would want you to know. This is an effort where the President of the United States has met with the families of the U.S. hostages 3 times, Jake Sullivan 15 times. I've met with, I think, almost 100 of the families. So the families that have Americans that are held in Gaza, but I've met 78 other families. And this to us is so important that we've put our creme de la creme of our military, diplomatic, and I would say intelligence experts on conducting this negotiation. These are tough. As we said in the Army, the enemy gets a vote. You can come up with your brilliant plan, but the second you step off the helicopter and bullets start flying, your plan usually just starts to go to pieces a little bit. You got to be able to adapt. So in this case, the other side has the key to the jail cell, and we have to be smart enough to just have a plan, but keep adapting to stay with it. But the one thing I would share is that you're not just getting the rational, intellectual effort of my country. I'm telling you straight up, the President, the National Security Advisor, and everyone else, Brett McGurk, my office, the Secretary of State, you're also getting their hearts. These are people who cry and think. I've seen maybe I shouldn't share this. I know this is being live streamed. I'll probably get fired for this. But I've seen the President of the United States shed a tear when talking to families about this. This is not an abstraction for my country. This is personal, it's important, and we're gonna work, we're gonna be with you, we're gonna get this done. I'd like to say we're gonna get it done the next week, the next month, but we're gonna get it done soon. But even if something were to go on forever, we are gonna be there with you in the foxhole, in the trenches, working to bring people home. We're gonna be with you.
Roger, the Shakespeare play, Henry V, is, from the movie Brothers in Arms. There is a phrase that I feel fully with it when hearing you, and appreciate the fact that you come here, join us this evening, sharing with us your experience and sharing with us your spirit. The phrase said, "For he who shed his blood with me today shall be my brother." Thank you, brother.
And thank you.
Well, in Hebrew, we call this a siach lochamim. It's a discussion between warriors, and these are warriors who know how to shoot straight, but on the other hand, they show tremendous compassion, and they care about the hostages. And Roger, I think we're going to pray a lot together with you as we continue to pray for the immediate release of the hostages, bimera bi'amenu, as soon as possible. It is now my honor and privilege to introduce His Excellency Ambassador Jack Lew, who currently serves as U.S. Ambassador to Israel. He assumed this role in November 2023, following President Biden's nomination. Lew brings extensive experience in public service, having previously held key positions such as the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury and White House Chief of Staff. Lew has worked in various capacities throughout his career, including leadership roles at the Office of Management and Budget and the Department of State. I am also calling to the stage Professor Boaz Ganor, who will hold a discussion with Ambassador Lew.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Jack Lew, I had a debate with my staff today because when I saw the schedule of the conference in Hebrew, it was written there, Ambassador Yaakov Lev. And they said, what are you talking about? This is Jack Lew. I think it's important that our audience will know that you are both Jack Lew, but also Yaakov Lev. So thank you very much for honoring us and coming to the conference, actually for the closure of the first day. I know that you are marking right now the first year of your activity as the ambassador in Israel, and what a year they brought you to. I think it's the toughest year for an ambassador, American ambassador, to be in Israel. And first of all, I would like to thank you for supporting Israel and conducting your job, difficult job, I have to say, for the benefit of Israel and United States, and for the strategic tightening the strategic connection between Israel and United States. And thank you for coming to the conference. So I would like to start with a general question. How would you assess the strategic ties and relations nowadays between Israel and United States?
First, thank you for having me here tonight. And when I saw the date of the conference, I wasn't quite sure how we were all going to get together for a conversation on normal subjects as we mark a year of this terrible hostage crisis after the brutal attacks of October 7th. And you said to me, we have to get together, we have to keep going, and we have to keep doing the things that we did before. And you couldn't be more right. We have to remember, but we have to continue. And I applaud you and everyone here for keeping on with the important work that you do here and not missing a beat. I think the ties between the United States and Israel are deep and enduring, and I would not worry about the moments when there are disagreements. Friends, family members don't always see things the same way. Doesn't mean they're not family, it doesn't mean they're not friends. Israel's never had as close a friend as the United States. I don't think the United States has ever done for another country what it's done for Israel over this last year, and I'm proud to say that. As President Biden said right after the attacks on October 7th, the United States has Israel's back, and that hasn't changed. I don't believe it will change. The fact that we see things differently is perhaps an obvious understatement. As a world superpower, we look at things through the lens of a superpower. As a fragile democracy in this region, Israel looks at things through its own lens, which is how does it project its deterrent strength at every moment that it needs to. I think the value of us going back and forth on the things that we sometimes see differently is you get to a better answer when you think about things strategically from both perspectives. And I think we've added that to the way many of the tough decisions have been made, whether it's on humanitarian assistance or on how to prosecute elements of the war. We're at a crucial moment right now, and I think the fact that the United States stands unquestionably behind Israel is crucially important. And one of the things that we have to do is not allow differences of opinion to become daylight between us. And fear of daylight can't become a fear of giving our best advice, because we wouldn't be the close friend that we are if we held back. And I think the one thing I fear is over the coming years, there's a new generation that doesn't have the historical perspective of the generations before. I mean, President Biden, by age, will be the last president that remembers a world without the state of Israel. And that's a powerful historical reality. And as things go forward, there needs to be outreach to a young generation where the core values that tie Israel and the United States together, that make us so close, are going to need some attention. And not to just assume everyone understands it, because they didn't grow up in a world where Israel came into being and was a fragile, new democracy under constant threat. And Israel today sometimes appears like a superpower, even though it's so small. I say to people, per person and per square mile, this is the most complicated place on earth, I think.
You rightly so said that President Biden gets it. He I would say, is probably a Zionist the way I see him and his activity. But this is a very difficult year and very difficult time for President Biden because it's a presidential election year. And I would like to ask you, does the fact that we are so close to the election day, does this has an impact on the American commitment and support to Israel nowadays or not?
I think it makes much less of a difference in Washington than it does here. I have not been in a single conversation where our decision has turned on where we were in the election cycle. There were moments when President Biden was still a candidate for re-election when you might have thought that we would change policy because things were becoming challenging in the prospective upcoming election. It didn't make a difference then, and it doesn't make a difference now. I think the president has at every point done what he thinks is right, and I think he will continue to. There's no question but that in an election year, people get very focused on the election, and the next month will be a time when America is very consumed with its own domestic affairs. But I don't know that there's another issue that will compete for as much attention as the issues here. And I know even over these last days, these last weeks, that's certainly been the case.
And as you said, this is a deep ties and commitment from the side of the United States to Israel. And it used to be a bipartisan approach towards Israel. Do you believe, and we're talking about a very close and tight elections, do you believe that regardless who would be the next president, this connection will sustain and maybe even become stronger?
I think it's crucially important that support in the United States for Israel remain a bipartisan commitment, and that Israel work vigilantly to maintain bipartisan support. There's going to be some challenges to a pro-Israel position from the right and the left. There's going to be questions raised about the scope of U.S. international commitments. There's going to be questions raised about some of the policies that Israel pursues. But if you look in the middle, there's probably 70% core support for Israel. On both sides, it's about the same probably. You want that to be a unified bipartisan policy. And I would just caution that if there's ever a thought that it is helpful for Israel to be closer to one side than the other, I have thought for the almost 50 years that I've been around public life that that would be a mistake, and I think that today.
Can you spell out for us what are the vital interests of United States in the current conflict, and what do you think Israel should do in order to support those vital interests of United States?
The United States' support for Israel is fundamentally rooted in our commitment to the security of the state of Israel, our belief that having the partnership with Israel is good for both of our countries, and that the historical relationship is just of a very special nature. I think in the world we live in today, with the United States being the world's biggest superpower, but with challenges coming from other places, Iran in this region is a real threat to stability in the region, and the U.S. has a security interest in there being stability in this region. And Israel is an important ally in the region. I think there are many other countries in the region that share an interest in that stability. And one of the things that I think has been really important in the last few years is the Abraham Accords that were developed in the last administration, the efforts that we've been pursuing to expand the countries which have not just business relations but diplomatic ties to Israel should grow. And we think it should include Saudi Arabia. We've that when I agreed to accept this post in July, I didn't have any way of knowing October 7th would happen. The mission that I came here committed to doing was completing the normalization process with Saudi Arabia, because that's something that's of huge strategic importance to Israel, to the United States, and to the region. That's going to be just as true, for the rest of the time I'm here, notwithstanding the fact that I've been here for a year of the war, and coming through this crisis and finding a way to put that back on track is crucially important.
Once I visited the Pentagon, some colleagues in the Pentagon, and they asked me, what is the difference between Israeli strategical thinking and American strategical thinking? The first answer that I gave them, Israel doesn't have strategic thinking at all. But leave this aside, I said, it's like the difference between an American air carrier and a speedboat. I said, what do you mean? How do you compare the two? I said, look, United States, it's like an American air carrier. It thinks strategically. If they have a problem, they would analyze what they want to be in 5 years from now, and from then to go back and to understand what is the immediate move that they need to do. Israel doesn't think along those lines, probably because we have so many immediate threats to deal with. We are the best, in my view, tacticians on earth, but the worst strategic thinkers in the world. The good news, I said, that there is a good combination between the two, because the speedboat needs the strategical support of the air carrier, and the air carrier needs the speedboat to do the slalom and protect the immediate surrounding of the air carrier. I'm asking that because I wonder, what is the end goal or the end strategy that you think that should be, and does United States has a strategy of ending the conflict that they would like to see fulfilled?
So I think in the last half a year, we've seen the value of the strategic aircraft carrier in real life. Having our ability to place our strategic aircraft carriers has provided a deterrence that's made an enormous difference in the calculus that other strategic decisions makers are making in other capitals. I think the truth is, we put a huge value on strategic thinking, and you can say that's the luxury of being a country that's not at immediate threat. But it also goes back to the character of being a superpower. We have to think strategically, because when we make decisions, it can have enormous impacts, not just on our country today, but on the region and the world for a very long time to come. I think Israel has been in a fight for survival for most of its life, but it has enormous capabilities and power in the region, and increasingly has to take into consideration strategic, not just tactical outcomes, because they too can have outsized impact. And we're sitting here in a week when people are weighing those kinds of choices in terms of thinking through what would be an appropriate response to the awful attack last Tuesday night with 200 ballistic missiles. Mm-hmm. I mean, everyone in this room who was here was in a shelter because almost everybody in the country was in a shelter. And that can't be tolerated, but in responding to it, one has to take into consideration strategic considerations as well. And those are the kinds of conversations we do have with each other, and those kinds of conversations are going on even this weekend. Do we have a strategy for the end of the conflict and the time beyond? We do have a strategy. Time is testing it in terms of whether it could be completed in the time that we're here. The Biden administration will end in January. So what I'm going to say sounds perhaps a bit unrealistic given the shortness of time, but I don't think it's any less relevant in terms of being the right strategic course. Coming out of this conflict, Israel needs to be safer in the region not just because it has the military power to confront every threat, but because there's a new diplomatic agreement in the region that provides stable long-term security. I mean, I talked about normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia. That is something that would be the biggest defeat for Iran and for Hamas coming out of this war. It's going to be a challenge getting there in the next few months, but it's not impossible. I was more optimistic a few months ago than I am now, not because the mission is unachievable, but just because time on our, in our term is coming short. I think looking at Gaza, there has to be a way of rebuilding Gaza in the day after, where there's an alternative to Hamas as a governing body for Gaza, where Palestinians are making decisions and governing themselves without Hamas. That's going to be hard, but we've said almost from the beginning of the conflict that you have to be thinking about the day after now, because it is hard. I think people are thinking about it more now in the last few months than they were at the very beginning of the war. But it's going to be a pretty heavy lift. If it's done right, it can tie countries in the region together. If it's Israel on its own, it will look like occupation. And that is strategically a very big difference. So I don't actually think the government here wants to be in the position of being in Gaza, but getting to a different reality in the future is going to require not just military power, but enormous diplomatic work in the region and in the broader world, both to provide material support and financial support, but also legitimacy to what comes next. I think the ultimate objective that we have would be not just to deal with the resolution of Gaza, but to figure out a solution to the underlying tension between Israel and Palestinians, and a way for Palestinians to not be attracted to parties, to terrorist groups like Hamas. That means there has to be a better future. Now, today, tomorrow is not the time for that. But over the horizon, there has to be a willingness to talk about it. It's connected to Saudi Arabia, because to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia will involve having to make a decision to embark on that conversation, so that at the end of a process, there's a better hope for Palestinians' autonomy. And the word state as an ultimate goal will have to be something that people can tolerate. Right now, I'm told most people can't tolerate it. I would actually say even today, if the price of tolerating talking about a Palestinian state over the horizon is normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia, that's a deal people should take tomorrow, because one is of huge strategic importance and value and enduring value, and the other is embarking on a process that ultimately has to happen anyway, because there's no other solution.
You've mentioned that we don't know who would win the elections in the United States, but we do know that President Biden is not a candidate. Therefore, he will not be in this position in January. And we are getting into what I would call maybe the twilight zone between the election day and January. And do you think that this period of time is more fragile, is more dangerous? Maybe the Biden term don't is weaker during those period of time?
I think anyone who makes the assumption that until his last day in office, President Biden won't keep his commitments and follow through is making a big mistake. I think the extent to which he is focused on what is going on here, the decisions that are being made here, the commitments that he is making to people here, it is not casual, it is serious, and we have a visit here today by the commander of our CENTCOM. He'll only have one commander-in-chief at a time, and people should not have any notion that there will be an eye taken off the ball or hesitancy to follow through as we need to. I think the fact that attention will shift to the future is normal. There will be a transition process. People will start thinking about who are going to be in jobs in the next administration. But you govern until the inauguration. And the area in which that lasts till literally the last minute is foreign policy. And there's no issue that's higher on the agenda than the issues here today.
No doubt that President Biden is very affirmative in his support to Israel in these troubled times. But there are at least two Iranian proxies that directly challenge American assets, and I refer to the Houthis and the Shiite militias in Iraq, maybe even Syria, that attacks American targets. And if I may say so, I don't see a decisive activity coming from American side in order maybe to eliminate those two threats which are posing a direct threat to the United States.
I think just this weekend, these last few days, we had a rather substantial military operation in Yemen, which we believe is a proportional response to the threats that we've been facing. We're very careful to have proportional responses. We're not looking to expand the conflicts that involve us. We practice what we preach. When we urge avoiding escalation, it's because we believe in trying to resolve things without getting into regional war, without making the situation more dangerous. And I have found it surprising in the case of the Houthis that it's taken us as long as it has for the rest of the world to be concerned about closing down a shipping channel that's roughly 20% of the world's commerce. You know, it's almost unimaginable that it would have taken months for that to become something that was a matter of real international concern. We've been the ones who, from the very beginning, have been in the waters when there were Mayday calls for support. We're not alone anymore. That's good. But I think it relates to the way other countries have made their policies with regard to Israel, and when it was viewed as something that the Houthis were doing because of Israel, it took a little longer for the reality of what they were doing to be taken as seriously as we took it from the very beginning. So we're committed to defending our interests. There's nothing that is a higher priority for an American president and an American government than protecting U.S. citizens. While we have fought zealously to achieve a hostage deal and to relieve all of the hostages, our first commitment has to be that we have American hostages. We still have 7 Americans who are in captivity. Mm-hmm. We're not going to rest until every one of them is back home. The ones who are living and the ones who deserve respectful, burial.
Shifting from the proxies to the head of the snake, i.e. Iran, we are minutes, hours, days, weeks before what seems to be an Israeli retaliation against Iran as an outcome of the attack that Iran attacked Israel on the 1st of October. What do you think should be the Israeli considerations in planning and preparing and executing such a retaliation operation, if at all?
So I'm not going to speculate on decisions that are being considered literally right now by the security cabinet here, where there are private conversations going on between our governments about the best way to proceed. I think what we've made clear publicly is that it's important for this not to escalate into a regional war. We've made some public comments, the president has made some public comments that suggest the things that we think create the greatest risk of things spiraling. On the other hand, we haven't said that Israel should just tolerate having 200 ballistic missiles shot at it in a little over an hour, even if it was 2 hours. I mean, the remarkable defenses, the air defenses that we together have executed to protect Israel from these attacks in no way should diminish how serious it is to fire weapons like this, across a long area with huge warheads. There was a picture in one of the news stories of the piece of a ballistic missile that the people looked like, like ants around the portion of the ballistic missile that was sitting on the ground. They're enormous. With huge warheads, they can do enormous damage. So the fact that the air defenses have worked to, for the most part, protect civilian populations is not a reason to say that it's not a huge threat. It is a huge threat. At the same time, the response shouldn't create a larger war and a war that becomes a regional war, because that would be worse we think it would be worse for Israel, for the region, and for the United States. So there's a balance that has to be struck, and I'm going to leave the details to private conversations.
Yeah, so probably you won't be very happy with answering my next question, which is President Biden said loud and clear that the United States would not let Iran becoming a nuclear state. And some people, at least in Israel, believes that this is the golden opportunity now, because we have the legitimacy, Israel has the legitimacy to retaliate against Iran, and maybe this is the time to eliminate or at least damage their nuclear efforts in Iran.
So I'm not going to speculate on what Israel can and can't do on its own. When I was closer to these issues of the nuclear program in Iran, when I was Treasury Secretary, I had pretty detailed knowledge of what could and couldn't happen. And at the time, I thought the United States had to make its own decision whether it would get into a war with Iran. And I think that's still the case. Israel has to make its own decisions with the capabilities that it has, and the United States has to retain its ability and right to make decisions for itself. And the challenge is a nuclear Iran is a big threat. I spent many years of my life putting sanctions on Iran and doing enough harm to Iran that Iran was willing to get into a negotiation to take serious steps to slow down its nuclear program and to provide an opportunity to not have a nuclear Iran. We're now in a point in time that's 10 years beyond that. And it's harder now than it was then. But that doesn't mean that the decision to go to war has become an easy one, or that destroying Iran's nuclear program is something that should be treated as a decision to make because last week was a successful week. It's about strategy, not tactics.
Shifting gears to the American efforts to reach an agreement in order to free the hostages. You have mentioned that you're still working on that. You're really wishing to see the day that those hostages would be free, American hostages and other hostages. But we expected to have a new Biden deal that will be put on the table, and maybe with a firm message coming from President Biden to the two sides, take it or leave it. And it seems that this is evaporated through the events that happened since then in the Middle East. So my question is, did the United States exhausted its efforts to suggest a deal? And does a stages deal, as was discussed, 3 stages, the first would be humanitarian and then the rest too, maybe seems to be irrelevant right now, and instead of that, the American deal should bring to the table an overall deal that will include the cessation of the war in Gaza and starting the day after activity of rebuilding Gaza.
I don't think there's a way to fully describe how much effort the United States has put into achieving a hostage deal and a ceasefire. As Roger was saying as I walked in, It's from the President of the United States through his whole senior national security team, all of us. We're never going to give up. The fact that we're at a moment now that is not feeling like a deal will be today or tomorrow does not mean that we're going to accept the fact that there's an alternative to ultimately freeing the hostages. I don't think there is a way to free them other than through negotiation and through working on it and not giving up. We saw the horrible execution of 6 hostages, some of whom were on lists that the negotiators were going over to be exchanged if there were a deal. It was a terrible betrayal of trust, even in a world of very little trust. You're negotiating who is a humanitarian hostage, and then they're killed. And I think where we are now is a moment where there aren't any great signs that Hamas is interested in a deal right now. But that hopefully will change, and we'll only find the moment when it changes by pushing and pushing and pushing. Israel has maintained military pressure. Sinwar does not want any of us to know where he is, so it's not even easy to have a conversation. But we remain committed to finding avenues to continue pushing. You ask, should the phased deal be discarded? I'm not prepared to discard the phased deal until I have confidence that there's an alternative that's more likely to succeed. I am not persuaded that we're at a moment where all the hostages are going to be released by Hamas, or that Israel will comply with withdraw all troops from Gaza today or tomorrow. So I would be careful not to discard the phased deal until you're very confident that the other. All of us would be happy if all the hostages could be released tomorrow, and if there could be an end to the war. But if you don't have confidence that the two sides will agree to that, the phased deal is a way to make progress. Mm-hmm. And if any opening appears, as it might, as the situation changes, I think the likelihood of Hamas thinking that they're going to get a global support or regional support, to come in directly on their behalf is probably not higher now than it was a week ago. They don't know if Hezbollah can or if it wants to. It didn't want to before. It didn't jump in the full bore way that they wanted them to in October or in April. And Iran is in a place where it's now trying in its own way to figure out how to avoid a regional war. Hopefully that will create some further openings in the very near future.
So you believe that the Amos Hochstein deal in the north is still viable and might be...
Look, I think what happened in the last few weeks is that the possibility of having a diplomatic solution in the north, apart from a deal in Gaza, is now very much a possibility at the end of the operations in Lebanon. It's not a certainty, but there's a pathway there. And that will put more pressure on Hamas and on Sinwar. The horrible reality is, as Ambassador Carson said, is that Hamas gets a vote. It's not just a vote. They get to make the decision. Do they let the hostages go? And obviously they shouldn't have taken them, and they should have let them go a year ago. And we have to keep pushing to find the moment. What we can't do is give up, because if we give up, that just is the end of hope for them to come back. And we're not going to give up. We're not going to give up today, not tomorrow, not for as long as it takes.
So talking about hope, the last 2 questions I have for you. One is, can we still hope for a normalization with Saudi Arabia, or this initiative is now recent history?
I think it is very much in the interest of Saudi Arabia, Israel, the region, and the United States. So I think there's still a pathway there. I had hoped that it would be something that we could complete before January. There's still a small pathway, but we're not there today. If the issues in Gaza could be resolved, if Gaza was quiet, and if the situation in Lebanon ends up in a diplomatic solution, it's not impossible to get the Saudi deal across the finish line. But time is not our friend. You know, there will be an ongoing conversation, and that doesn't have to end at the end of the Biden administration. But the best time to do it is right now. And it's taken longer than we wanted to get to the point where there was a hostage deal and a ceasefire in Gaza. And we're now in a situation where I don't know exactly how long the discussions will take after the military operations in Lebanon. But I'm an optimist. I think both of those are going to ultimately be the pathway ahead. And if we don't complete the work, we will leave it in a place where someone else can pick it up and complete it because it's kind of set up and ready to go.
So that leads me to the final question. Is the ambassador of United States in Israel that concludes his first year, what gives you hope, if at all, to the future of the region, of Israel, and the Israeli-American relationship?
Even in the darkness of this year and the darkness of the day of this first anniversary, there's a lot to take hope from. Seeing the resilience in this country, how people have come together to help people who are neighbors and friends and people who are total strangers, sacrificing and risking their own well-being. It's inspirational to see just normal people come together. Governments sometimes should take lessons, I feel this way in my own country as well, from the goodness that just regular citizens can bring to bear. Israel and the United States are as close as countries can be, and that is an enduring relationship. I think the future that we've been talking about for the last hour are strategic opportunities that aren't that shouldn't be squandered and aren't going to happen unless people make them happen. It takes leaders to make hard decisions. It takes leaders to convince their citizens why hard decisions are a good idea. This is not easy. It hasn't been easy for the history of Israel. And there's a moment, an inflection point, where I hope that leaders rise to the occasion and that citizens demand leadership from their leaders. And that's going to be a test here, like it is in every democracy, our own included.
So Ambassador Jack Lew, or with the Hebrew name Yaakov Lev, thank you so much for coming to the conference. Thank you so much for sharing with us your thoughts, your concerns, and your hopes. And thank you for everything you personally do for Israel and what Biden administration and the American people do for Israel. Thank you very much.
Very good to be with you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank His Excellency Yaakov Lev for coming here tonight. With a name like this, it's optimistic. We can be optimistic. Thank you for all the difficult questions that you asked Ambassador Lev, President Ganor, and now I think we have some very difficult decisions ahead of us. So it's going to be interesting to see what the next couple of weeks bring us, which brings us to tomorrow's session. Maybe we'll get some of the answers of what's going to be happening in tomorrow's session if those things aren't happening during the session. But anyway, Stevie asked me to give you guys a number of I would think, some news. Okay? So, first of all, Stevie would like you to know that tomorrow is the second day of registration and that it's at 7:45 in the morning. This conference starts very early for registration. They're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed around here. At 8:30, sharp, we have a memorial ceremony for the victims of October 7th, and we would like to remind the participants to be in the auditorium in time to allow for an honorable ceremony not disturbed by late entries. And then I'm supposed to remind you to return your headphones. And lastly, please drive safely, because Israeli drivers can be very dangerous. There's a lot of terrorism on the roads, actually. And please follow the guidelines of the Homefront Command while driving home. If there is a siren, please stop by the side of the road, get out of the car, and kind of like protect your head. Good idea to have a helmet in the car in this country these days. It's more comfortable. Anyway, guys, you've been here for 3 hours, and this place is still practically full of people. So you've been a very patient audience. You guys deserve a Medal of Honor. Thank you, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.